today, and we've hit the magic number, so I guess we can start, and then our colleagues will join us. So welcome everybody to this webinar for African CSOs on development of complementary reports to the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. As Jennifer already indicated, I will still go over a couple of logistical issues before we start for the benefit of those that have just joined us. First of all, we have interpretation in English, French, Arabic, and Portuguese. If you go to the bottom of your screen where it's written interpretation, you're able to choose from either Portuguese, French, and Arabic, which is indicated as Japanese. We have a Q&A box where you can type in your questions as the workshop goes on. We will be looking at them and trying to put them together into some broad themes so that we can have responses from the appropriate people within the workshop. I'm going to have an overview of the program in a short while, but I just want to indicate that we will have a proper Q&A session where we will all our questions will be responded to. We are privileged to have members of the committee. We have members of the committee secretariat here with us today. So any questions that we have, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We are going to start off in a short while with welcome remarks from the Director of the Africa Union Liaison Office for Save the Children, who will then invite the committee represented by Honorable Sidiko to give us an introductory remarks on the African Charter and the African Committee of Experts. And then we will straight away go into various sessions where we are going to have the first session giving us an introduction to state and CSO reporting on the African Charter. The second session talking about the development of alternative reports, good practices, and also child participation. And then in the third session, we are going to have a number of countries from various regions on the continent sharing their experiences. And then we are going to have a question-answer session at the end of that to identify the common challenges, the common best practices, and formulate a way forward to ensure that we improve on our reporting to the African Committee of Experts. As I've mentioned, we have a number of African Committee of Experts Secretariat members with us, so we should have a very interactive discussion as we proceed with the webinar today. So I take this opportunity once more to be grateful to everybody that has taken time to join, and I will be moderating the workshop. So I want to invite the Director of the African Union Liaison Office and Pan-Africa Office for Save the Children, Doris, to make the welcome remarks for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cleophas, for the introduction. And Yambo, Mboro, Mbote, buenos dias, bonjour, Nangadef, bon dia, wherever you are and in whatever language that you speak, good day to you. My name is Doris, and I'm the Director of Save the Children AU Liaison Office. And it's a pleasure to be part of this first webinar, and really grateful for the support that we have received from the Secretariat of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, as well as in Toto News, for really supporting us in the planning of this very important first. Oh, I did not turn my camera, I'm being told. Okay. I thought that was actually managed from Toto News, but I guess no. Okay, so good afternoon again, and it's really a pleasure to be here and to welcome all of you to this, the first of a series of webinars that we will be organizing as a way of commemorating the 30th anniversary of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. As we all know, and I think we're all familiar with it, the fact that reporting is very important. It provides both member states who have the primary responsibility in reporting on progress against the provision of the Charter. So it provides member states the opportunity to report on progress, but it also provides civil society society organization the opportunity to complement reports from member states. So the process is very important, and I'm really pleased that we have the cooperation of the African Charter, the African Committee, the Secretariat of the African Committee to engage in this process and this first webinar. So we want to organize a series of webinars really to commemorate the charter, but also to take stock on what has worked and what has not worked, and where we need to make improvements. And a place where we really need to make improvements is the reporting. We see the number of reports, state reports to the African Charter reducing year in, year out. And that is not acceptable because, as I said earlier, the reporting provides us with an opportunity to really engage at the national level, bring all the different stakeholders and see what's working, how we're moving child rights forward, and what are the areas that are where we need to make improvements. If we're not reporting, it means that there is an accountability gap to children to whom we are in fact accountable. And if the reporting is not happening, so there is a challenge in making sure that we're moving forward. We also noticed that the reporting is happening in certain areas. So member states are reporting to the CRC, but they are not reporting necessarily to the African Charter on the rights and welfare of the child. So for us, the one key message is to ensure that there is joint reporting and that civil society are really part of that reporting process. And in terms of reporting from CSOs, we've also seen that this is an exercise that brings different civil society organizations together to really assess what progress has been made. We've also seen in certain countries, and we will hear it during the panel, the discussion that we will have this afternoon, that we've been very creative in the ways that we've been reporting. We've also brought in, we've had reports that have been either informed by children or led by children. And I certainly believe that that's the way forward, and that's a very encouraging way of involving children in reporting on child rights in Africa. So for overall, what we want to do until the end of this year, in collaboration with you who are participating in this webinars, and in collaboration with different partners and the Secretariat of the committee, we really want to really reignite and give a new energy to reporting. We want to make sure that we all mobilized to call on our member states to report on a regular basis. So that means every 3 years, once you have submitted the initial report. And we want to make sure that we have the accompanying voice from civil society organization to provide a complementary report. So we count on you to engage with your members, your state parties. We know that 6 countries are yet to ratify, and one of the goals that we have in this series of webinars that we organizing in commemoration of the Charter is also universal ratification. So for the countries that have not ratified yet, I'm calling on you to go back and engage your government and say, 30 years, you have not ratified. The time to ratify is now. Please let us know how we can support you. So that's the one of the objective of this series of webinars. The second one is really making sure that civil society organizations are really well equipped, know the different steps, what it takes to report, and we will be right there with you. to make sure that you are engaged in alternative reporting. You have what it takes. You have the capacity, but you also have the skills, and you're bringing different voices around the table to develop that alternative or complementary report. Again, it's really about really deepening the understanding of what it takes to develop a complementary report, and encouraging you as civil society, all of us, to engage in reporting and providing this complementary report, as well as engaging children. And we've seen some, and we come back to that, some good examples. With those words, I'm really grateful again for your participation. And I look forward to your engagement in this afternoon webinar, and would like to thank you again for participating. And I'm not sure whether Honorable Sidikou is online and whether she can participate. I would like to respectfully invite her to make her statement. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Doris. Malheureusement, Honorable Sidikou n'a pas pu être en ligne parce que
was not able to join because she has a few internet connection problems. And so in order not to waste time and not to delay the participants, she asked me to to deliver the speech that she wanted to deliver to participants, if you'll allow. Doris, your microphone is on mute. Yes, please go on. Yes, please go on, Mr. Philippe. Please go on.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Je suis Philippe.
Thank you.
Je fais partie du
My name is Philippe Sekone. I am a member of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. I am a member of the Secretariat. I am in charge of child rights within the Secretariat. And as Honorable Sidikou, as I said earlier, Honorable Sidikou has a few internet challenges, and we know that is common in our region. And so she has given me the opportunity to share with you the message she wanted to pass during this webinar. Honorable Sidikou is the second vice chair of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and she's also the special rapporteur on child participation. So I'm going to read her speech. Madam Director of the AU Liaison Office of Save the Children, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of civil society organizations, distinguished partners of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. On behalf of Madame Sidikou and of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, I would like to sincerely thank Save the Children for organizing this webinar, which is crucial, on the contribution of African civil society organizations on developing complementary reports to the African Committee of Experts on Rights and Welfare of the Child. Dear participants, the state parties reporting mechanism is the most important mandate of the committee in monitoring the implementation of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child for many wide reasons. The mechanism enables holistic surveillance of the Charter because state parties are supposed to produce reports on measures taken to implement each of the major provisions of the Charter. The mechanism is a continuous process that enables evaluation, continuous and periodic evaluation of the measures taken to implement the charters in our state parties, the challenges encountered, and the progress made. The mechanism also enables prevention of the violation of child rights and gives the possibility to correct these actions and decisions made in relation to the Charter. This crucial mechanism will lose its strength without the participation of civil society organizations, and we need complementary alternative reporting to enable this. Alternative complementary reports helps the information given to the committee to have a different perspective on the rights and welfare of the child for state parties and the information received from state parties. The information received from civil society organizations through complementary reporting helps to strengthen the credibility of the procedure and submitting reports from state parties, and also to fill in the existing gaps in reports written by state parties, and also facilitate the verification of facts that are in these reports. In addition, the report writing process contributes to hearing the contribution of civil society organizations on the rights and welfare of the child, as well as the cooperation between civil society and the government. Dear participants, I would also like to insist that the complementary reports of civil society organizations have an important role in child participation. Child participation is a challenge in our continent, but all stakeholders, including civil society, are in the front line to increase important child participation. In developing these complementary reports, we have noted the participation of civil society to increase child participation in presenting and submitting their reports. That is very encouraging. I invite you all to integrate significant child participation in compilation and evaluation of complementary reports and in your other work. Dear participants, with these few words, I wish you a fruitful deliberation, and I would like to assure you that the committee appreciates the work and the commitment of civil society organizations in the implementation of the African Charter on Rights and Welfare of the Child. That is the message that Madam Sidiku wanted me to pass to you, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Philip. I think for delivering those remarks. And also thank you to Doris for those very good remarks. I think essentially what we are trying to say is we all miss the good old days. The good old days when you got the agenda for the committee session, it was about 15 pages long with 7 countries giving reports and various CSOs giving reports. And it was stretched out over 2 weeks, and we had a vibrant child rights movement on the continent that was holding governments accountable to their obligations under the Charter. But with time, we've seen a reduced number of countries reporting, and this definitely means that the Charter is not being properly monitored at country level. And we know that as CSOs at country level, we have the responsibility to hold governments accountable at that level. We have the responsibility to lobby them to submit state party reports. We have the responsibility to also collect information and make sure that we develop alternative reports so that we get this charter implemented fully in all the countries. So what we are going to do today, initially when we started thinking about this series of webinars, we realized that different countries are at different levels in terms of child rights monitoring. So what we wanted was to bring, first of all the players together, civil society organizations, the committee, and we would have a conversation around the challenges that we are facing, the good practices that we are facing. And when we discussed with for example, the CSO Forum Secretariat, we know that at regional level and at country level, we have capacity building exercises that go and target the issue of the how to write the reports, what goes into the reports and all that. But at the continental level, we want to have a discussion that is more broad, where we can identify from the CSO side, what are the challenges? From the donor side, what are the challenges? How can the committee assist us undergo this process successfully? So you will realize that today's webinar is going to be broader, and then we are going to zoom in on a number of countries. So for example, countries where we have not had any reports submitted, we would like in the course of this year to have a webinar where we will identify those very specific challenges. For those that reported and fell back, we will also have something targeted. For those that have not ratified, we will have something targeted. But for today, because we've come together as a continental representation of CSOs, I would like to ask to start off, first of all, with an introduction. Let's get some numbers. Let's have a perspective about the reporting and where we are. And my colleague Kalkidan is going to be taking us through that session. So Kalkidan, you have about half an hour, and I will propose that if you're able to save some time and reallocate it to the rest of the people, then we will be very grateful. So Kalkidan, over to you. Give us an overview about reporting under the Charter. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Cleophas. My name is Kalkidan, and I'm the Child Rights Advocacy Officer at Save the Children, African Union Liaison and Pan-African Office. Welcome again to the webinar. I will oblige Cleophas and try to spend 15 minutes on briefly highlighting the purpose of reporting, the status of state party reporting to the African Children's Charter and CSO complementary report. Most of what I'm going to tell you have already been highlighted by the previous opening remark, but we'll build on that. And we're also aware that most of you who are participating in this webinar are already familiar with the topics, or even better, have hands-on experience on the area, which I hope will enrich the discussions that will follow the presentations. So as a springboard to the broader discussion, I will discuss the rationale for setting up the reporting mechanisms, the basics of reporting on treaties, and what we envisage will be the benefits and the trends in the continent with regard to state party reporting and CSO complementary reports. When we come to reporting to the African Committee of Experts on the Right of and the Welfare of the Child, which is the treaty body for the Charter tasked to receive and consider state party reports, our discussion on state parties and CSO complementary reports will have to anchor on the ultimate goal we want to achieve, why we want to report on treaties. So ratification of the African Children's Charter is merely an initial step towards realization of children's rights in the continent. The most important step is the state parties take concrete action in their national systems to implement the provisions of the Charter. And given the sovereignty of states, treaty bodies such as the Committee of Experts has limited access at the national level to ensure the Charter is being implemented. Thus, we have one mechanism of monitoring the state party reporting. So ideally, we will want the ratification to be followed by implementation, then followed by state party reporting. What we expect from state party reporting, as we heard from the preliminary the opening speech, is that it will give states an opportunity to evaluate their national laws, policies, systems, and practices, and determine if they are in line with the Charter, and assess the measures undertaken by the states to respect, protect, and fulfill children's rights. Now, this was also give an opportunity for the state parties and all other stakeholders to identify the progress and challenge in the implementation of the Charter. And in this context, for this webinar, most importantly, it will be a platform to initiate a conversation about the implementation of the Charter among children, CSOs, and other stakeholders. Last but not least, then it's also an opportunity for the state parties to receive recommendations from the African Committee of Experts on the kinds of measures state parties ought to take to reinforce their effort in implementing the Charter. So within this reporting mechanism, what's the role of CSOs? CSOs have a significant role in the effective operational implementation of such human rights treaties and systems. And unlike the treaty body, such as the African Committee of Experts, that do not operate on the ground, CSOs operate at grassroots levels and are closer to states as they engage with governments on continuous basis. So we expect them to have a major role in the reporting procedure. State parties reports involve CSOs at many levels. First, states are expected to consult with CSOs so that they will have an input on the state party report to be submitted to the committee. Or alternatively, the CSOs can submit complementary reports based on the state party report submitted to the committee. Complementary reports, as I highlighted on the slide, is one of the terms used to refer to reports submitted by the CSOs on based on the state parties. There are other terms such as alternative reports, shadow report, or even CSO reports. But for the purpose of this webinar, we'll just use complementary reports. Then we might ask why CSO reports if they are part of the state party reporting. If they are asked their input by the state party, why do they still need to submit a separate report? Experience shows that in many cases, CSOs do not and might not have the opportunity to contribute to the reporting process, or their views are not taken fully into account. So that will be a good opportunity for them to do so. And it's also an opportunity for the committee to have a clearer picture or several sources of information to overview the implementation of the Charter. They are also expected to fill the gap where state parties have not provided enough information, or in some cases where the information submitted by the state parties is deemed incorrect by the CSOs. It will allow also the committee to monitor implementation of the Charter, as well as provide tools for the CSOs to monitor the implementation at the national level. It might be a good platform to identify difficulties, challenges in the implementation, and even provide solutions cooperatively. Establish a platform for dialogue between the committee, the CSO, the state parties, children, and other stakeholders or partners. It's also an important opportunity to make children's experience and opinions heard, since state party reports rarely include children's views. And in some cases, state parties reports focus on legislative frameworks rather than implementation. So this could be a good basis or rationale for having a separate CSO report besides the state party reporting. Now, this being the rationale, we ask what's the status of state party reporting to the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. It has been, I think, raised by previous speakers. The number of reports submitted by states is lower than expected, and certainly not as frequent as is done for the UNCRC. Of all the 48 state parties, including the Sao Tome and Principe that has ratified the treaty in 2019, 11 state parties have not submitted their reports until now. So 37 have. That's a little progress. But when we see the timing, the timely report of state reports, we see that states quite often do not report on time. About only 23, that's out of the 48, have submitted one report, and the rest have reported more than once. Of course, here there is the leniency of the committee, understanding the work involved with state party reporting, that it has allowed a combined report from states, so they combine their initials or second or first, all the reports that's expected of them.
Kalkidan, please hold on a
yes.
bit. We don't have French translation. We need to check the interpretation. It has gone off.
Sorry. Okay.
And I'll let you know when to proceed. French, traduction français. Kindly check whether you're online. Jennifer, please ask the French interpreter to get back online.
I'm doing that.
Okay, the moment they're back online, let us know so that Kalkidan can continue.
I will check now if it's back.
Can you hear me, French interpreter? Okay, Kalkidan, you can continue. If we have a problem, we will flag it again. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm back on. So I think I lost the trend, but the state party reporting, as we said, is important indicator of one of the monitoring mechanisms. State party reporting is also important for this discussion because alternative reports or complementary reports are based on state reports. So if the states do not report, then the civil societies will not have the chance to complement or fill the gap that is viewed in the state party reporting. So that's one area that CSOs should also engage in, encouraging state parties to submit their reports on a timely fashion. Okay, then when we come to the CSOs, that's another gap that we see. We don't have a comprehensive data on how many CSOs have been able to provide complementary reporting to state party reporting. Some of the data we have found have shown that between 2008 and February 2011, 8 civil society reports have been submitted. Post 2011, we see about 4 or 5 reports. During the preparation for the webinar, we have come to understand that unlike state party reports and concluding remarks that are available online and public documents, CSO reports are not that much available. So we might not have a clear picture on how far CSOs have been engaging and how active they are and what are the challenges they face. But it shows the assumption is that for all the state party reports, there have been CSO complementary reports. The data, of course, shows 13 reports so far. Some of them more active. For example, the Senegal National Coalition of Association, NGOs and Working for Children seems to be very active, and not only in providing CSO complementary reports, but ensuring child participation in the sessions or pre-sessions of the committee. So maybe part of this webinar would be filling the gap of this comprehensive data on CSO complementary reports and also the gaps and challenges they face. As a conclusion, now that we have discussed the rationale and the status of CSO and state reporting in the continent, the following presentations will focus on the practice of developing complementary reports that would feed back into the actual work on the ground. So thank you for listening attentively. And if you have any question, I'll get back to you at the Q&A session after the presentations. Thank you, Cleo. You can take over.
All right. Thank you very much, Kalkidan. Thank you for giving us that overview about the presentations and the state party reporting and the alternative reporting. At least we have a bit of a background about the numbers that we have in terms of the reporting. And maybe at this juncture, I would like to take an opportunity to invite any member of the committee secretariat that has anything to say about the status of reporting so far, especially in terms of state party reporting and CSO reporting. Any overview, any general comment that you would like to make, any member of the committee secretariat, you can maybe have a minute or two. Any interest? I'm going to probably ambush Philip or Ayalu. Any comment regarding the, yes, thank you, Philip.
Merci beaucoup, Cléophas, et merci aussi à Kalkidan pour avoir...
Thank you, Cleophas, and thank you also to Kalkida for the presentations you've made.
De façon, en fait, globale, le travail...
For the general overview you have given
du comité par rapport au...
to the committee, especially on the process of reporting. What I would like to add is we do not have many civil society organizations. We do not wish that maybe, we would wish to maybe do more lobbying so that state parties can submit their reports on time. But what we have observed is, although we receive reports from state parties, we often have difficulties to have reports from civil society organizations. Currently, we have 3 reports that we are evaluating, but we have not yet received reports from civil society. That is for the countries of Guinea. Also, we have a report from the Republic of Seychelles and also the report from the Federal Republic of Ethiopia. Now, based on that, from the report of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, we are examining the reports of state parties, but we haven't received a report from civil society organizations. So we would really like to invite civil society organizations to make our work easy, help support the work of the committees so that we can be able to receive reports from civil societies in order to have a balance. They are the ones that are on the ground. They are our eyes on the ground. And if we receive a report from the civil society, it will enable us to better write our recommendations, especially in terms of implementation of the charter in our countries. Over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Philip. I think while we are continuing with our discussions, a lot of these issues are going to come up, and I think we are here and we are going to try as much as possible to respond to all the questions. So we are going to go to the next session. I will be facilitating the next session, and it's divided into 2 sections. And I'm glad to say that we've finished at exactly 14:50 hours East African time, which means we have kept our time to the letter. I'm going to be making a brief presentation about best practices in terms of reporting, and one of our colleagues from Zambia will be giving us a bit of an overview about the process, how they develop the report, but a key in her presentation is going to be the child participation element. And I don't have slides because I like my presentation to be alive, to be responding to current issues. So I've already picked out a couple of questions in the chat box that will be informing my presentation as we go along. As I indicated earlier, there is capacity building that happens at country level and at regional level that is led by various organizations and donors and partners on the specifics of reporting to the African Charter. So issues to do with what is the content that should be in the report, what is the procedure, when is this done, all those are dealt with, I think, in detail, because you would need quite a number of sessions to be able to cover that. But for us, what we are looking at, the overall perspective here is that once a country ratifies the Charter, they are meant to submit their initial report within 2 years of ratification to the African Committee of Experts. So that means if, for example, Somalia ratifies the Charter today, then they need to submit the initial report to the committee within the first 2 years of their ratification. After submission of the initial report, then countries have the obligation to submit periodic reports every 3 years. And this is now, throughout the process, is where we find that we need to engage with governments, first of all, to ensure that they report, because the complementary reports, as the name suggests, is meant to complement what the state is reporting. So we cannot do complementary reports without something that we are complementing. So that is something that I had seen in the chat box that came out, and I think it's something that we should deal with. Something else that came up that can contribute to my presentation is whether there is a format for reporting. The committee has developed guidelines for CSO reports. And the guidelines are available on the committee's website. They can be downloaded. It's not a very long document. It explains the need for reporting, explains what should be in the report, what is the format, and what is the process that is followed in the reporting for CSOs. So I would encourage, again, one of the key things that I need all of us to establish and put a lot of people to task on this is that at the apex, we are talking about civil society organizations reporting to the African Charter. And we need to invest as partners to make sure that we are assuming that all CSOs at country level know the format for reporting. We are assuming they know what is supposed to go into the report. We should invest in making sure that we have strengthened national civil society organizations to report, because this is the only way we are going to hold states accountable. So yes, there is a format, there is indications of what information should be in that report, and it's available widely, and I think in quite a number of languages for ease of access. So that is something else that came up. So to begin my presentation, the challenge that exists mostly when it comes to reporting is we always wait until it's the day to report. We forget that child rights monitoring is something that is meant to be continuous, is something that never stops, because the fact that Ethiopia, for example, has submitted a state party report does not mean that child rights violations are not going on. They can submit, defend it today, and it's considered by the committee. And while it's being considered by the committee, at that very moment, child rights violations are taking place. So as CSOs, we need to remember that child rights monitoring is a continuous process that never stops. And I like to always compare child rights monitoring to going through school. So for those of us who are parents, when your child is going through school, I don't know, there are many systems of education, but let's assume they are starting from grade 1 and the end of it is grade 8. Every 3 months, the teachers will issue some sort of evaluation about how your child is performing in school. The idea is that you will be able to identify where the problems are in the first 3 months of grade 1, in the first 6 months, in the first 1 year, and like that until you get to the 8th grade, where all these issues that your child has with their education have been identified, dealt with, so that when they do their examinations, they pass. So if you're a good parent who looks at the report forms and the evaluation reports every 3 months, every end of the school term, then you will find it's easier for you to identify the issues that are facing your child in school. But if you're the kind of parent that waits until your child has not succeeded in an exam, and that's where you start, bringing all these issues to the table, then you have a responsibility. You have contributed to that failure. Reporting is essentially like that. Our countries signed the African Charter. They have an obligation under the Charter to do their initial report. They have an obligation to do periodic reports. As civil society organizations, we have the obligation to monitor that they are implementing the various provisions of the Charter. And if they are doing so, look at the reports they are submitting to the committee, look at any shortcomings that may be in those reports, and we use that platform to give information to the committee regarding the information on children's rights in our countries. So when you see the reports not being submitted, we like blaming each other, but we all have a responsibility for that. So when it comes to complementary reporting, the first thing that I would like to highlight, because I have like 4 highlights on CSO reports that I want all of us to remember while we are having this discussion. Complementary reports should be factual, objective, and should represent the situation of children on the ground. The reason for this is you cannot present a report that is not backed by factual information. We have to collect data. We have to collect data about the various provisions of the Charter. If we are talking about education, if we are talking about access for children to, all these articles in the Charter, we have to collect data. It has to be verifiable, and we have to present it. So the first thing that we need to invest in our organizations, because in many organizations we find that we want to do everything. We want to work on education, we want to work on health, we want to work on child marriage, we want to work on FGM, we want to work on all these things. And when I come to the organization and need your assistance, for example, in putting together an alternative report or something, you find that we have anecdotal data. We don't have data that can go into a report and be defended before the committee. And most of the time, the quality of the reports that we are submitting as civil society organizations is affected. So that's number one. So we have to focus and make sure that it's factual, objective, and it represents the situation of children on the ground. That's number one. The second aspect, again, that I want to talk about in regard to complementary reporting is that complementary reports should ideally be participatory. They need to involve many other actors. It's difficult for somebody, one organization or 2 organizations, to develop a complementary report by themselves. Reason being, as I've indicated, there are many articles in the Charter that deal with a number of children's rights. And our organizations, most of the time, specialize on 1 or 2 or 3 of the articles that are mentioned in the Charter. So for example, if an organization is dealing on matters to do with education, they will have more information on education than, let's say, an organization that is dealing with health. But when you bring them together, then you get to benefit from the positive impact of having all this information, first of all, and then you get representation from other sectors and you're able to have a complete picture of children's situation on the ground. The reason why I'm persistent about this particular aspect of my presentation is you will realize most of reports that have been submitted to the committee are reports by child rights coalitions. Organizations come together at country level, they work on this report, they submit the report, they go to the pre-session, and the state party presents its report. But then these coalitions of the willing kind of die after the reporting process is finished. They forget that they should be doing the monitoring as the coalition that submitted the report, because it's much easier to do the monitoring as a coalition. And this is one of the other recommendations that we need to think about. So if we have a coalition of CSOs that developed the report, that went to the pre-session, that looked at the state party report, what happens when the state party report has been submitted and considered by the committee? The committee issues concluding observations. Right from that moment, we need to keep track of these concluding observations and make sure that our governments are implementing what was recommended, so that we don't need again to come looking for each other when it's reporting season. So where is this guy who was doing health? Where is this person who was doing education? Because at that point, there's already a disconnect. So we should always try to make sure that we keep our collective nature as CSOs, especially at country level, and we are able to make this joint impact together. So that is the other aspect of the reporting that I'm saying. The other important aspect of the reporting, especially by CSOs, and this is where we get a lot of antagonism, especially with state parties. The aim of an alternative report is to enhance the quality of the state party report. The states are the ones that are tasked with the responsibility of reporting to the African Committee of Experts. They are the duty bearers. They are the people that implement legislation at national level. Without them, we will not have children's rights realized. So what we are doing essentially as CSOs is looking at what the state has presented, looking at any shortcomings, because we also acknowledge that even the state has capacity gaps. I have been in places where in the education sector, for example, the Catholic Church is present more than the state is present, and they would most likely have more information about the status of children in terms of education than the government. So what we are doing, and that's why it's called a complementary report, we are complementing. We don't want to antagonize. We don't want to look like we are, competing with them in any way. We are adding information that is not present in the report. We are clarifying the figures that have been submitted by the state, so that when the committee is making their consideration of the state party report, they have the story from both sides. And if you're both saying the truth, then I don't think there will be any antagonism. So we shouldn't approach the whole complementary reporting process as a way of getting back at the government or antagonizing the government. But that should also not make us afraid to point out when we have obvious discrepancies, which can be backed by data into our reports. So you need to be a really objective person to lead a process like this. And I'm glad that we have very strong coalitions at country level in many countries that are leading on these issues. But it will be good when we make sure that we are objective. And this also brings for the issue that we need to work with governments. We always, ideally, even the process of putting together a state party report, the state will consult CSOs. So it becomes paradoxical when you're presenting your report as CSOs and the government had invited you and you took part in the state party report process, and then you come to contradict the same. So let's look at that keyword complementary and make sure that we harmonize these processes to make sure that we are successful in doing this. Lastly, complementary reports about children cannot be written without children. I find it ridiculous that in many instances, we are talking so much about children's rights and the children were not part of the process of putting together that report. So we could be talking about something that absolutely makes no sense to children. So there was a question already in the chat box about why we didn't have a children's session before this. And I like the fact that somebody already has pointed out that, yes, child participation needs to be enhanced in processes like this. But then I will be glad to add that we've had a series of children's consultations on various issues. At least this year, we happen to have a continental consultation on children. First of all, during the CSO forum, and then again before the Day of the African Child. So their input also feeds into this, because one of the key comments from some of the sessions that we've had with children that have been continental in nature has been, stop doing things for us without us. That is not going to work. If you want us to contribute, we are available. We have various mechanisms that we can contribute. So children have to be involved in this process. This can either be by having children consultations during the putting together of the alternative reports. We can have a children's report submitted from the countries where the reporting is being done, but there has to be deliberate effort taken to ensure that children are part of this process. Having said that, in terms of the content and the format of the alternative report, as I have indicated, we have very clear guidelines from the committee on this. They're available on their website. We did not want to spend today going into those depths. Today was more having a sharing of best practices, and we will, of course, proceed to ensure that all regions have at least some level of capacity building that is very specific on the way, content, format, the whole process. But having said that, again, I would like to invite one of our colleagues from Zambia, who is going to share with us the process of development of the alternative report, and more specifically dwelling on aspects of child participation in the process, so that they can reinforce some of the arguments that we've been having here about the process of reporting. So Judith, you have about 15 minutes. So welcome, Judith Mlenga from Zambia. Thank you.
Yeah.
No.
Judith, check whether you're muted, and then we can proceed.
Usually marginalized and left behind children. Reason being, when we did the 2016, in 2016, when we consulted children to report to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, we consulted children who were from child rights clubs and also from the media network. These are children who are very much well-versed in their rights, so I would refer to them as child rights elites. And the report that we submitted, it looked like a junior report of the alternative report. So this time we thought, okay, let's get the voices of the children who are never, most not consulted, so that we also hear of their lived lives. So we came up with 8 categories of these children. Those are children with disabilities, children living in abject poverty, children working and living on the streets, children who had households, children with children, children in marriages, children engaged in child labor, and children on the move, the unaccompanied children. And we targeted 3 children from 3 rural districts, quite rural districts, off the line of rail where we got most of the children in the child rights clubs or the other child groupings in other NGOs. And we decided to identify these children through the Department of Social Welfare under the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services. This is a government ministry. Reason being, it's this department that supports vulnerable households and children. And also, we didn't want government, after we present the report to them, to claim that we had fake children. So we left it up to them to identify. Furthermore, these vulnerable children are familiar with the social welfare officers in these districts because they deal with them on a daily basis. And we didn't want the children to be intimidated by our presence from Lusaka. So we wanted them to be relaxed, secure, and comfortable in the company of the people they are familiar with. Furthermore, to overcome local language barrier in communicating with the children, the social welfare officers are conversant in the local language in the areas that we wanted, and they also facilitated obtaining consent forms from those children that had still parents, traceable parents, and from the children themselves, those that did not have parents to give the consent form. And also the social welfare officers have the knowledge of the local context of the lived lives of these children, because these are all vulnerable children, they're targeted children. And so they helped also during the final compilation of the report to corroborate some of the information that were being given by the children. So that was the identification of the group that we consulted. So we had targeted about 120 children, and 5 from each of the categories that I just outlined, the 8 categories. The challenge we had was there were no children. We were informed that they couldn't identify children on the move or unaccompanied children. But our discussion with them, we realized that this is not a concept that they are familiar with, because one of the districts in Luapula is close to the Congo, and we've had an influx of refugees, most of them children coming in, and still the officer said, oh no, we couldn't find any unaccompanied children. So we didn't have this category at all. That was one of the challenges. So then how was the process? We started, of course, with requesting the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services for cooperation. And we wrote to the permanent secretary, who is the CEO of government ministries, and were given the go-ahead. And we were informed that, they were going to work with us on this process. And then we looked at the committee's guidelines on CSO complementary reporting. And we summarized this and simplified, because what we wanted, we didn't want children to be taxed with giving some of the information they were not aware of what's going on. So we wanted the children to report their lived lives to the committee, because we thought that the statistics they'll get from our complementary report, they'll get from the government. The legislations, as was pointed out, government reports are full of legislations, but very oblivious or very absent-minded on issues of administrative procedures, issues of public investment in children's rights, and so on. So we didn't want to burden them. We just wanted the committee to hear the children's lived lives as they live them. So we looked at the thematic areas and we synthesized what information from those thematic areas, as per the guidelines, the children could really respond to. Then after that, we have a range of child-friendly tools that we use in our organization to engage with children. So we looked at our catalog of these child-friendly tools, and we then decided which one of those would actually work for which thematic group. For example, we have, when we are dealing with issues of sexual sexual abuse and child protection, sexual abuse. Children don't want to stick out and say they have experienced this. But we would normally use the puppets, where the children will be talking through these puppets. And we also use, we would maybe draw a human, figure on the floor, and the children will point out, they will put stones or leaves or anything to go and place on those parts of the body that they don't like being touched. And then you see the prevalence of abuse by the number of stones that are put near the genital areas. And because children don't want to be put on that spot, then you can carry on conversation through these puppets. So that's what we did. We looked at, okay, these are the catalog of, what we have. Which ones can work with the different types of children? And then we invited social welfare officers from the districts, the same ones who work directly with children, so that we come and train them in, first of all, the reporting guidelines by the African Community of Experts, and then also on those tools to consult with children, and also the kind of information we thought that children could actually relate to. And we had wanted to have because we had 3 districts, so we're hoping to have about 15. Unfortunately, we're informed by the PS that they are terribly understaffed and they only have 3 per district. So we had the 9 come over to Lusaka, and we spent some time training them and orienting them. Then after that, they went back to the district to identify the children and also to get the consent forms. And then we had the consultations. So from us, we were mere observers and kind of backup facilitators to the social welfare. And we were recording. They were not writing what the children were saying. We had recorders. So they were recording the actual words that were spoken by children. And the children were placed in groups according to the thematic areas that we thought they could relate to. And they were free to swap groups if they were uncomfortable. And we also kept reaffirming their consent. So we kept asking the facilitators to keep asking the children that they had the right to back out, to stop at any given time. And so we kept getting reaffirmations after every 30, 40 minutes. Do you still want to continue? Would you rather go and rest, and so on? So that they didn't feel put upon to stay and start creating stories. They were, in the hope that they'll be fulfilling what we're looking for. So we had a consultation. Then the next step, we engaged paralegals, legal assistants to transcribe the recordings and write them, and translate them in English, but being careful to do very literal translation and not to impose adult vocabulary. I mean, this is a challenge as an organization that works with children constantly. This is a challenge. We find that, adults, when we engage children, we hear children speaking to us in their vocabulary, and then we impose our vocabulary on those children. And when somebody is reading, the stories become kind of not really real. Like, did the children actually say that? Where did these children get that vocabulary to express their views in that way? So we wanted to keep the authenticity of children's vocabulary as much as possible. We didn't quite succeed in this because when you read the report, there's still some vocabulary that they are adult. But that was the transcription and translation of what the children had done. So then when we got this, then we compiled, synthesizing, because we're consulting children in 3 districts. So most of them, were saying similar things because they are in similar social and economic context. So we had to now synthesize together and compile this report. And then we now went back to the same children for validation of the report. And we met the same children same groups, and we presented the report on each thematic area. This is what we gathered that you said. And they were able to let us know that no. Here, this is what we meant, not what you said, and so on. So we did validate, and also with the social welfare, we validated, the officers, we validated with them. And then we came, and after the validation, we finalized the report and had it submitted. The challenges was, of course, one, the understaffing in the government district social welfare offices. So whereas we would have wanted to have more facilitators from the districts to engage with the children so that they get a little bit more attention to the children, but we couldn't because they're understaffed. And the PS said, even sparing them for that time was too much, but he understood the importance of what we're doing. And then, like I said, there was no identification of on the move or unaccompanied children. So they told us there were none in all the 3 districts, including the one closest to the border with the Republic of Congo. And also the other one is, the tendency for transcribers and translators to use their adult vocabulary, therefore diluting children's voices. This we didn't completely overcome, but we tried the best we could. And then children are not accustomed to expressing views. So non-direct methods have to be used all the time in order for them to speak to the issue. For example, if you are talking about family environment, we would have maybe just cut out figures of a boy and a girl. We would ask the children to name them. We'll ask the children to name what you think this girl is going to be called. They'll give them the names and they will say, what happens to the girl when she wakes up in the morning? What will she do? And then you can clearly see the burden of the chores of the girl as opposed to the boy. And what amused me with the groups where I was, because I couldn't be in all 3, is that the names the children were giving the boys, they were giving them names like, that translates in, playful, or scatterbrain, and they will have a good laugh about such names. And then they were giving children, the girl children, cartoons, cutout figures, very caring names, like that means, somebody who loves, who cares, who is empathetic. In translation, those are the names they would give them. So that was the other challenge. So we need to, when we talk about child participation, I'm always wary, and my colleagues on the platform I work with here will bear with me how I'm always arguing about this event, child participation, when we leave out what happens in our own homes, in the own communities, where we expect children to come to Parliament and speak at Parliament when they don't speak in their own homes. And this is where the children are restricted, in expressing their views. And of course, the thematic area of children, because these are marginalized children, most of them had very little to say because they are not in school. And then we would have wanted a physical meeting with the committee during the pre-session, but this was not possible. These are marginalized children, no birth certificates, no birth records. So even if we wanted to do a fast-track passport, to obtain a passport, it was just not possible. And the committee, we met them in Bamako, Mali, and they were regretful that they couldn't meet the children. But of course, now that we have COVID, we have a new way of working. If we had had that, there would have been a virtual meeting, which could have been easily arranged, and translators there so that the children would actually give their own story. And the lessons, now I'm going to the lessons we learned. Like I've said, the concept and that the reporting mechanism is not known by government officials. Our facilitators were all government employees, and they are the ones who are mandated to care for vulnerable children, but they had never heard of the reporting process. They said, oh no, all these things happen in Lusaka. We don't get to be invited. So they were quite grateful that we introduced them to this process, that there is actually such a process happening, and they are on the ground. They would give that information on the ground of these rural populations, but they don't get to be invited to Lusaka to take part in the state party reporting, and I'm afraid maybe even our own complementary reports. And the other thing is that the engaging with children using child-friendly methodologies, it's actually needed. They were very appreciative that sometimes cases are taken to them as social welfare officers of children's abuse, and the child is mum, and they will try for several days trying to get evidence out of that child, especially in sexual abuses that go to court, and the child would not speak. But they say, look, if we had these tools that you use, we could probably get the views of the child even when they don't have to actually verbalize what they want to do. And then the other lesson we learned is that most of the children we engaged with, these vulnerable children, they spoke a lot to the issue of being loved and cherished. It came up several times in their stories. And there was one little girl who had been moved from the rural area to go to a family along the line of rail here so that she could be given an education. And she said she ran away because she was never shown any affection by the family that was there. She was always on the periphery. So she said to us, I would rather go and starve with my mom than be educated in a home where I'm not loved. So the issue of showing love to our children, maybe it's an African, because this also comes up even when members of the child rights clubs. Recently, we had a meeting with members of the child rights clubs who were asking them how COVID has affected them. And some of the girls said it's the first time they've had to actually have a discussion with their mothers. That, mom previously was do that. She was a chore giver. But now she's got nowhere to go. I've got nowhere to go. They're actually talking. And the other lesson we learned was that the marginalization of the children, we saw it. The first consultations, schools were not in session. So we used schools because we didn't want to take them to lodges and hotels. We wanted them to be somewhere where they could be comfortable. So we used schools. But during the validation, schools were in session. So we had to go to lodges. And I went to Eastern Province, and early in the morning, I heard the guards, because my room was close to the gate, chasing dogs. So I thought maybe he was chasing dogs. Only when I came out to realize he was chasing my participants. And I said to him, excuse me, allow them in. Madam, are you sure you are with these kids? Why not? No, these are street children. I said, yes, those are the ones I've come here for. So that marginalization was so easy to see how such children are invisible to the rest of us. I think this is what I had to share. Thank you very much, Cleopas.
All right, thank you so much, Judith. I mean, that is an eye-opener for most of us. I think we have a challenge. I think when it comes to child participation, it's something that cuts across organizations. And we used to have this debate where you would ask yourself, if you take this very good and eloquent child rights expert, policy expert, and put them in the midst of 1,000 children, will they even know what to say? So we are good in writing things that affect children. We are good in analyzing and coming up with the policies. But if I throw you in the middle of 1,000 children, what are you going to do? How are you going to communicate with them? And I think from your presentation, we are already starting to see some of the challenges that we will respond to, issues to do with understaffing. And it's not just with government, but even having people who have child participation expertise within our organizations, the ones that you're able to send and they will get the message across. That is something that we need to really look at. The lack of capacity among various organizations as well as government departments in terms of the reporting process, that is something that has always come up and we need to effectively deal with at all levels. And of course, the issue of the most vulnerable categories of children not being reached in this process. And you'll find that these are the children that need the most protection, and somehow they are the ones that are not being reached. So I think those are three key takeaways for me from that presentation. I would like to give Ayalu 3 minutes to weigh in on this before we continue to the next session. Ayalu from the committee secretariat.
Thank you very much, Cleophas. Thank you, colleagues. It's just to, as we are discussing a number of issues regarding complementary reports.
Kindly, if you can turn on your camera for our YouTube audience, please, unless it's impossible.
No, it's possible. Let me remove the cover there from my camera. Sorry, just 3 seconds.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Can you? Yeah. Should be fine, right?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you. Please proceed.
Good. So I was saying it's just to raise some of the issues and, of course, to also reflect on where we are in terms of complementary reports and state party reports. We see some very interesting questions being raised in the questions and answers box as well, something that we may reflect on later during the Q&A session. Just for participants to know, as we speak today, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child has been ratified by 49 countries, that's been mentioned before. From the 49 countries, 40 of them have reported to the African Committee of Experts at least once. That means it's a good number. 40 countries have actually submitted at least their initial reports on the implementation of the African Committee, of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. And almost all of them, except those countries that you mentioned, all of the reports have been considered, of course, except those 3 countries or 4 countries that have been mentioned before. Up until today, when the committee considers state party reports, civil society organizations have also submitted complementary reports, received except to the reports in Ethiopia and Algeria. So the committee has considered previously the reports from Algeria and Ethiopia without any civil society reports, without any complementary reports. The case of Eritrea is a bit different. Of course, the committee had to make a decision, even if there were civil society organizations based abroad. They were not based in Eritrea. The time that the committee considered the state party report from Eritrea. So the committee had to make an exception to receive civil society organizations reports submitted by organizations based outside of the country. So in terms of numbers and in terms of status of reporting, that's where we are. But as Judith has presented very, very important and a very interesting issue in terms of child participation, and this is one of the challenges that we are also facing within the African Committee of Experts. And it's just to let the participants know, currently the African Committee of Experts is also developing guidelines on child participation to enhance child participation within the work of the committee, which includes complementary reports, and of course to member states. So when that guidelines come out, we do hope that we will be having somehow more clarity in terms of the modality of child participation within the complementary reports procedure before the African Committee of Experts. So this is one of the challenges that we are facing, particularly participation of children in vulnerable situations. And it's very interesting that in her presentation she has presented their experience in involving children in vulnerable situations. But from our experience, we have not, unless otherwise in few instances maybe, we have not really received a participation of children with disabilities, for instance, as part of the delegation of civil society organizations coming to the African Committee of Experts to actually make a presentation on the report that civil society organizations have combined. This is one of the challenges which we may keep reflecting on how can we enhance actually and ensure participation of children in vulnerable situation in the civil society reports procedure, starting from, of course, the compilation of the report, but also during the presentation of the report as well. The second issue that you may also reflect on as we proceed with the discussions is one of the challenges that we are facing practically from two countries against. There are instances where the committee has received two different reports from a particular country. So this also has been recorded as as a challenge within the work of the African Committee of Experts. So, as you know, the committee receives only one complementary report. So this is, of course, this should not be cast on stone. We may also reflect on that. Is there any possibility for the committee to receive more than one complementary report? This is something that we may have to bring to the attention of the African Committee of Experts as civil society organizations working practically on these issues. These are also some of the things that we might have to reflect on. But as it stands now, the committee procedure allows the committee to receive only one complementary report, and we encourage that report should come from networks of civil society organizations. So that in a situation where the committee received two reports, the committee had to make a decision which report actually should be considered as a complementary report and considered by the committee. So this is one of the challenges that we're facing within the committee. The other issue is most of the organizations which are involved in producing the complementary reports, we don't see them within the work of the African Committee of Experts. Of course, they are represented through their leaders and everything, or through other organizations, through the networks and things like that. But most of the organizations at the grassroots level which are actually producing the reports, most of them, they don't have observer status before the African Committee of Experts, so they may not be aware, or as they are supposed to, about the work of the African Committee of Experts, about the value add of the procedure, this regional procedure that we have at the African Union Commission. So we would like to encourage civil society organizations on the ground, at the grassroots level, who are actually actively involved in producing complementary reports, to also come forward and really engage the African Committee of Experts in its various mechanisms, including by applying to observer status, but also involved in the various other activities like the communication procedures and submitting briefings and things like that. So this is also one of the challenges that we have noted within the committee. It's something that you may reflect on. The other issue, before I conclude, is the two issues. One is in terms of the content. Maybe later, when you give her the chance, Cleophas, Adiam may also intervene in terms of the challenge that we are facing with regard to the content of the complementary reports that we're considering. But one of the challenges with regard to the content is some of the concluding observations, particularly some of the complementary reports, particularly complementary reports responding to a periodic report of a particular country, they do not really take into consideration to the extent possible, at least, to the concluding observations and the recommendations that the committee has issued. That should be actually the baseline for the complementary report that they are actually producing, in addition to the report itself that the government has produced. So they do not make reference to the already existing concluding observations and recommendations, and that's the committee has a very keen interest to know on the status of implementation of concluding observations and recommendations. And in our experience, we have noted a very good experience in Zimbabwe, where civil society organizations have actually printed out and published the concluding observations and recommendations of the committee. This could also be the case in other countries as well, but that's what I have seen myself at least. And they have also developed an implementation matrix of the concluding observations and recommendations. So when civil society organizations actually produce and write their complementary report, they should make reference to the implementation level of the already existing concluding observations and recommendations, which also could also be considered as one of the gaps that we have noted. And finally, we may also reflect on challenge within the procedures of the committee itself. I know I'm from the Secretariat of the African Committee of Experts, but it's also an opportunity for us to see like what challenge do you face as civil society organizations as part of the existing procedures that we have within the African Committee of Experts? What are the gaps? Like, for instance, as we all know, complementary reports are confidential in nature. The procedure is confidential. The consideration of these reports are confidential. And it was done when the guidelines were developed, just to protect civil society organizations from harassment by governments, basically. But how do you evaluate that? Is there a change that you actually propose to the African Committee of Experts? Is it a challenge that you are facing? Is it affecting your work? The fact that the confidential, the civil society reports are treated confidential, even the consideration of these reports are treated as confidential within the work of the African Committee of Experts. How do you reflect on that? Even the list of issues that we developed after we considered the complementary reports, we developed what we call list of issues. These are clarifications, questions of clarifications that we send to the government, and you've never seen them. They are considered as confidential procedures within the African Committee of Experts, which is not the case within the United Nations treaty bodies. So how do you reflect on that? Is there a change that you would like to propose? Is it affecting your work negatively? This could be something that we would like to also hear from you, so that we can always improve the procedures and the working mechanisms within the African Committee of Experts. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you so much, Ayalo. I think I will not even add anything to that, but maybe it would be to bring to your attention that some of the issues that you're actually raising have been raised, and I could still see even in the chat box quite a number of questions related to that. It was difficult for us to even find the total number of countries where we've had CSO reports, because as you've mentioned, the process is confidential. So we couldn't assign figures. I think my assumption, which I think you've confirmed, was that only very few instances have we had state party reports without the corresponding CSO reports. So this is an issue that has already come up, and I'm guessing it's something that will be addressed, I think, in the Q&A, but also we need to look at the times. Nowadays, with the communication technology that is in place, sometimes the process could be confidential, but we all have access to these reports one way or another. So I'm thinking maybe in terms of promoting the openness and participation, it's something that you could look at. Your issues are noted. I think we are going to have a proper Q&A. We are trying so hard to chase this time so that we have a proper Q&A session where we can have enough time to respond to those issues. So I want us to move to the next session now, which is the session before the Q&A session. As we've indicated, and as Ayalo from the Secretariat has indicated, we have various categorizations of countries on the continent in terms of their reporting. So we have countries that have not submitted initial reports. We have countries that have submitted initial reports and not submitted periodic reports. We have countries that have submitted both initial and periodic reports. And also within that categorization, we have countries that have not ratified the charter. So we did a selection of a couple of countries across the spectrum where we've had reports submitted, that state party and CSO reports, countries where this has not been done completely, and countries where we've had initial reports submitted but not periodic reports. And we want to get a perspective from those countries, from organizations that were involved in this process. Practically, what are the challenges they faced? How was the experience? What are their recommendations to ensure that more countries are able to achieve the threshold of reporting that is required? So I'm going to request our country representatives. You have strictly 7 minutes each, so please time yourself so that we have enough time for the Q&A. So we are going to start with Kenya. Kenya is a country that has submitted both the initial and periodic reports, civil society reports, as well as the children's reports. So I would like Margaret from the East African Center for Human Rights to take us through the process. Maybe we might get to catch a few lessons from there. So Margaret, 7 minutes, start now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cleophas. I hope you can hear me. So my name is Margaret Wawira, and I work for an NGO called the East African Center for Human Rights based in Kenya. And we were the organization that was spearheading the development of the complementary report to the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child during this previous reporting period. So our report was covering, this was the third time we were reporting, and it was covering the period between 2012 and 2017. So we submitted our second and third periodic reports. So the process of developing the complementary report took about a year. So we started in October 2018 and were able to submit our report in November 2019. 66 different CSOs were involved at different stages. And at the time of submitting the report, we had about 31 endorsements, which have increased. Some endorsements came in late, so we have a total of 43 endorsements. So in terms of our reporting process, I guess the first thing that we did was that we kept track of the reporting dates. So at each rate, we have a treaty reporting calendar. So we knew that the second and third periodic reports were due in August 2017. So around that time, we started monitoring whether the government was intending to submit a state party report, by when. Of course, by January 2018, there were still no talks by the government to submit the report. So we started asking questions, and I think they started their reporting process mid-2018. So at that point, we started having our discussions. As you've heard with the other presenters, the government has to report, and then as CSOs, we submit our report. So we started planning early. As soon as we heard the government was planning to submit their report, we came together with a small group of like-minded CSOs and started brainstorming about how we would submit a complementary report. So the biggest decision that we made here, and was pretty useful to us, because we had, I think, a month between the time the government submitted the report and the next committee session. So we decided to develop a draft, and then once the government finalizes their report, we would align our report to what the government submits. Then we established a core committee. So this core committee was comprised of some CSOs that had the technical expertise, had the finances to invest in the process, and also committed to sort of spearhead the process, the whole process throughout. So the core team developed a roadmap for developing the complementary report. We also mapped out CSOs that would be involved in the process. So we tried to engage as many CSOs as we could. So just mapping out to ensure that all children's rights were represented. So in terms of the drafting process, you've heard there are reporting guidelines for CSO by the African Committee of Experts. So we used that to guide the format and the drafting process. Then at the initial stages, we conducted a training. So in most cases, some of the CSOs that you're involving in the process do not understand the reporting process, why it's important and why they should be doing it. So we took them through a short training on the charter and on the reporting process. Then we established thematic groups. So when you're dealing with a big group of CSOs, breaking them down into thematic groups really made coordination easy for us. So we broke down the teams into thematic groups, and this was guided by the reporting guidelines. So we had civil political rights, economic, social and cultural rights, among other thematic areas. So the other thing that we did was we engaged a consultant. So drafting the report can be tedious, especially consolidating all the information that you're getting from all the CSOs that you're involving. So we engaged a consultant. The process was driven by CSOs. I feel the need to emphasize that. The consultant played a key role in consolidating this information and helping us come up with a report. And then we held drafting workshops, which are very important because if you have tools and you're just expecting CSOs to sort of send information to you virtually, that can be a bit of a challenge. So we held several drafting workshops where we brought CSOs together and put them in a room, and they sat in their thematic groups and sort of drafted their sections. We had a participatory approach throughout the process, and not just in stages. So we have situations where you're involving CSOs only when you need them to endorse the report. But for us, from the initial, from when we started, we involved them throughout. Then once the report is finalized, we had proper validation. This is very useful because you want the CSOs to own up the report. And then we had, of course, a process of getting CSOs to sort of endorse the report, which is also crucial because there are some organizations that wouldn't want to be tied in with some items that you've included in the report. So we had a validation, an endorsement process. Child participation, very extensive. So as I mentioned, we started our process early. And so we had 48 children from across Kenya develop their own report. So we put them together for a week. We took them through a child-friendly training on the charter, on the reporting process, and why their voice needed to be heard. So we used child-friendly materials like crayons. They didn't just need to write, they could draw, they could write stories to sort of tell what they would want the committee to hear. And then we just supported them. I think for the next 3 days, we sort of just sat around and answered questions while we had them draft their own report. So this report, we then typed it out for them because some handwritings you couldn't even read and would have been tedious for the committee. And then we validated the report with the children just to confirm that this is what they wrote and this is what they want to communicate to the committee. Then we also had a child representative present the children's report at the pre-session. So we also participated in the pre-session. We had 3 CSO representatives at the pre-session and 1 child. So during the pre-session, we made a 15-minute presentation just outlining some of the key components we wanted the committee to be aware of. We had the child representative also make a 5-minute presentation. Then we basically engaged with the committee, answered questions, tried to verify where the information we presented there came from, and just to emphasize that it was a closed session, which means it was only CSOs and the committee members and a few members of the secretariat that were present. So it wasn't open to the public. So some challenges that we encountered I'd like to share with all of you is that sustaining interest. So when you're dealing with a huge number of CSOs, at some point, by the time we were doing the final validation, I think we were dealing with about 31 CSOs. So you can see sustaining that interest and commitment throughout the process was a challenge for us, and also competing interests. And then communication, coordination, again, dealing with a huge group of CSOs, starting early helps, because if you're sending out an email and you need feedback, maybe within the day, that becomes a challenge. And then
Margaret, in a minute.
Okay,
please.
okay. Funding was another challenge and low participation at the pre-session. I really wanted to share some helpful tips that came out from our process, notifying the secretariat. So our government submitted their report in October 2019, and the next session was in November. We had about a month to submit our report. So we notified the secretariat of our intention to submit the report. And also they are very open to engaging with CSOs. So writing them an email, if you have any questions, they're very open to engaging. Reaching out to international and governmental organizations and child rights networks. For us, ESCRN was very useful. They provided some funding and also technical expertise. Involve the government. Of course, this does not apply to all countries. There are countries where there is tension between CSOs and the government. But as we involved the government at the validation stage, they came, they gave us their comments. Of course, they don't agree with some things that we've included in our report. We didn't necessarily have to address all the comments they had, but we involved them. Know who the rapporteurs responsible for the review of your country are. I think for us, we have two. And also you can engage them even beyond the pre-session. And then our process is ongoing. So the Kenya will be reviewed in about a few weeks actually. And also, so for CSOs, we're also trying to see how we can be involved. Of course, there are challenges with this being a virtual session. So we're also trying to think about how now we can engage the committee, even as Kenya will be reviewed, so that the concluding observations reflect some of the improvements that need to be made to ensure that all children of Kenya enjoy their rights. Thank you so much. I hope I'll have a chance to answer any questions that you may have. Over to you, Claire, first. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Margaret. I think that's quite insightful in terms of the process, the challenges, and some recommendations going forward. So that is a perspective from a country where we've had quite a significant amount of reporting. And I think very quickly, maybe what we can pull out of that is that we have to have our calendars in place. We need to know when our countries are due to report, and we need to ask them the hard questions. We need to approach them and ask them, why have you not reported? Is the report being developed, so that we inspire them to do the reporting? And also communication across the board, either with the government, amongst ourselves as CSOs, with the committee, is something we really need to invest in, because as I said, this is a continuous process. So we have another presentation that is going to give us a bit of a highlight on how engagement with government inspired the country to report after quite a long time of not submitting the initial report. This is from Burundi. As you may be aware, Burundi submitted the initial report, I think in 2018, if I'm not wrong. And this was a result of a lot of engagement between CSOs and the government, the kind of pressure that we are talking about that results into some action. And we have Dr. Frank Bujeje from the Burundi Child Rights Forum, who's going to spend the next 7 minutes giving us insights about this. So Frank, over to you. You have 7 minutes, please. And if possible, Frank, kindly switch on your video for our YouTube audience. Thank you.
Ça va? Allô?
Is my video okay? Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Frank, yes, we can hear you. Proceed.
Vous m'entendez? Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'm called Dr. Bujeje Frank.
Je suis représentant légal du Burundi Child Rights Forum.
I'm a representative from the Burundi Child Rights Forum.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me? As I said, I am called Dr. Bujeje Frank. I'm the representative from the Burundi Child Rights Forum. First of all, I would like to thank Save the Children for having chosen Burundi to come here. Like he said, the first report was submitted in 2018, while the report was ratified in 2000. So we took 18 years before we wrote our initial report. So our initial report, it was sent after a long time, and that took a lot of time to involve a lot of civil society organizations, which were heavily involved to work with the ministry in charge of child protection and child rights. We were able to pile pressure on government stakeholders and these civil society organizations to work together. What we considered was that civil society organizations need to know that every time funding is given for child rights functions, it should follow the rights and the guidelines from the African Charter, which says that for us, we had an atypical approach So we organized field visits and we spoke about it to the ministry, and we noted that the ministry included child rights information, but the information that they had was not enough to make the right decisions to help children. So we went back to the ministry and we gave them the right recommendations on what they needed to do to include child participation matters, and they took our recommendations into account. And the other countries should take civil society organizations to the ground and take this information for themselves and then share this information with the relevant ministries who are collaborative and who can want to change the lives of children, because that is a win-win situation both for the children and for the country. So we worked with our elected representatives, in this case, the senators and our National Assembly leaders. So we had an approach to inform senators about the child rights issues and the challenges on matters of child rights. And generally, we spoke about the gaps that existed. For example, when you talk about child education, like in our country, you saw what happened recently in Burundi, in Gatumba. Since we had heavy rainfall, there's a section of the province that is found near Lake Tanganyika, and the entire population lost its housing because there was huge flooding due to the rains. And so most of the children in this area were not able to go to school. And most of these children were living in really despicable situations, and the vulnerability among familiar households in this province was really heavily spread. And they were not even speaking about child rights issues in such conditions. So, because the main interest there was a humanitarian crisis and they would not think about their rights, they were more thinking about food. So many had to drop out of school because of the situation. And we took all this information and we showed them the current situation. And in Burundi, we needed to work both at the local level and even the national authorities, and so that they can make a distinction between human rights and children's rights, because those two ideas need to be clearly distinguished. Because when you cite children's rights, we should also think about them having a bright future in the country. We also realize several challenges in terms of capacity building among government officials on matters of the African Charter, because some do not even understand the obligations of what they need to achieve in terms of the African Charter. So we organized field visits, but we also encountered challenges in terms of advocacy. Advocacy activities are very weak. And every time government needs to be to have advocacy, because sometimes they do not know their obligations on matters of the charter. And when you conduct advocacy before government members, they will have a change of mentality. When we speak about child rights, some of the government officials don't understand that children have rights. So we are obligated to go and organize visits on the ground, but we need to organize advocacy workshops. And sometimes we do not even provide resources. We think we should organize annually advocacy workshops to talk about and explain child rights and make them understand that these rights are important. We also work with government in the key decisions. For example, in Burundi, we organized a workshop recently. This workshop was to mobilize funds for vulnerable children. And we asked our basketball players to maybe come and speak about children's rights in their sporting activities. And these basketballers were able to understand our grievances, and they were able to pass this message during sporting activities. We were able to convince the government spokesman to come and even support us, because sometimes we have a huge issue with the resources, so we need to innovate to find resources in order to promote activities that go to defend the best interests of the child. And we have made the authorities realize that this is a very important feature that should be continuing, so that they can also be aware. And even parliamentarians and senators have come to some of our activities. So this is our strategy that we have used. And even on events such as the Day of the African Child and on child thematic days.
1 minute, we wrap up.
Ok, merci. Alors, comme conclusion, quand je voulais parler...
So I will not take most of the time. There are so many things that we can speak about the African Charter, but in conclusion, I'll give some recommendations. Based on the challenges we had, we recommend that the government has technical support on the elaboration of periodical reports and initial reports, especially for those that haven't done it before or do not have such experience. So national authorities or even international experts can give technical expertise to enable them sensitize on this matter. We also need to support organizations. For example, a report that was sent in 2018, we need support for civil society organizations. And for our country, we don't have enough resources to continue giving periodical complementary reports. So we need to support civil society organizations to develop complementary periodical reports that accompany the state party reports. Another thing, the African Charter is not sensitized. People do not know about the African Charter at the national level. So we need to sensitize and have sensitization campaigns in the country, both at the government national level and at the local authority level. And then finally, we need to have capacity building for civil society organizations and incite civil society organizations to develop complementary reports so that the state party reports can be representative and can be comprehensive. We also have included child participation in our reports, which means that we should have information that includes all children in our country, including the ones that have been placed aside, such as vulnerable children or children living with disabilities. And then finally, I'd like to give a recommendation that we should also support regional networks, because when regional networks are active, they can enable experience sharing and best practice sharing with other countries, because when we exchange ideas, you are strengthened and you can do better work. I thank you so much. I would say sorry for speaking so much, but I thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you once more.
Thank you, Frank. I think for us, the learning here would be the collaboration between CSOs as well as government, in terms of a lot of governments take a while to report after the ratification. So I'm glad that we had that kind of engagement with the state, and eventually it resulted into the state being able to report. But the next country we are going to have an experience from, and I still beg we keep the time because we need to have a robust Q&A session at the end. It's Botswana, which has not submitted any report to the committee. And we want to hear from Botswana, CSOs. What is the holdup? What is the challenge? How are we dealing with this? So we have a representative from Botswana, Botswana Child Rights Network. Chirwa, you have 7 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you so much, Cleophas, and thank you, colleagues from the region. Let me share my screen. Okay. Is it okay that side? Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. Please proceed.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Kluku, and I'm presenting on behalf of the Botswana Child Rights Network. It was born in 2018 as a network. I'm going to share experiences of reporting to the UNCRC and the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Regarding the UNCRC, Botswana had last reported in 2004, and the last time was in 2018 when we now, as a civil society organization, we decided to write a complementary report after the state report has been shared. But again, it was not shared as formal communication. And I think highlighting some of the challenges that you come across is the harmony in terms of relationship with relevant state departments that communicate or that even consult you as civil society that as the government, we are writing our state report to this effect. I think that it needs to be a clearly outlined process so that civil society organizations can be aware that the state is in the process of writing their report, which naturally then means that civil society organization will participate in that process. Thereafter, they will also write their complementary report. I think that needs to be outlined. If there is need to publish in the media or as part of government communication structures, that should be made, rather than resorting to making invitations that are to certain organizations. But I think lessons learned from that way is very important for us as civil society organizations in the country to come together and form a network. And the network was formed with the support of the Child Rights Network for Southern Africa. The state report was released in 2018, and we mobilized to write a complementary report. And you should also understand that when we caught wind of the state having submitted their report, it was late, as per according to the guidelines. And what we then did was we did some research to find out how can we then submit our report, since we realized that we have little time left. And we reached out to the Child Rights Connect, who reached out to the committee, and we were given enough time to mobilize other civil society organizations and start the process of writing the complementary report. We mobilized organizations, and we even raised it with the media that a civil society is writing such a report. During the session, we divided civil society organizations into thematic areas to make sure that there is good representation of what needs to be shared into the report. And it was a very interesting exercise, since it was one of a kind that included a lot of civil society organizations to contribute to it. And for myself, I participated in the UPR report, and you kind of had an appreciation of how the reporting process will be taking place. But it was new to most of the civil society organizations, a good and a bad thing in the process. We did have a separate session whereby we engaged children in the capital, and as I've been listening to my colleagues as well, it could have been better. I think because of time, but again, to be honest, some of our engagements, we limit them to the engagement, especially as a network. And I think one of the lessons we have learned as a network is we should plan ahead and really engage different groups of children, the differently abled children, children in rural areas, children in hard-to-reach areas, to make sure that we really get the best of their participation in their comfort space, in most cases, we use children in the capital to contribute to such processes. Networking, we had the Child Rights Connect. They gave us some technical support as well and provided guidance. They shared links, shared experiences from other countries as how it has to happen. CRINSA was there, SABST was there. They provided presentations that informed the process of developing a UNCRC report. We then verified our information with the Botswana Statistics Office. We invited them to be part of the process, where they also made presentations, where they were also engaged by other civil society organizations attending on the processes of gathering data and how to interpret their data. And it was a very eye-opening exercise for most of the civil society organizations. CRINSA was there and SABST was there as well to offer that technical support. As an organization that led the process, we then, developed a small technical working group that will then follow up the contributions that were made from discussions group and ensure that we verify. And it was a tedious exercise because when you write it, you have to share statistics. We have to confirm the statistics as coming from the latest research work. And it was interesting because people would share experiences more than confirmed reports, confirmed statistics. And we had to have a lot of back and forth to say, can you confirm this? Do you have reports to back it up? And it was an interesting exercise that took place. We then engaged a consultant who was there as part of the process to now finalize the report, and we shared with the group before submitting through the Child Rights Connect. We kept monitoring the process in terms of the dates as it was published on the UNCRC website, and we knew when the government will eventually appear there. And during their appearance, when they were engaged, we managed to watch the session. We shared the links with other civil society organizations. But it's as somebody who was leading the process of sharing with other civil society organizations the links, I feel that the participation could have been more. And I'm sure as a Child Rights Network, we will encourage participants to appreciate such processes and engage more meaningfully. We shared documents with the rest of the civil society organizations. After receiving concluding observations, we shared them with the groups that were part of the consolidation. We maintained the working email or the working group email, and we kept the civil society organizations abreast of the processes that were taking place. This, you'd see some of the pictures that we used during consultations with children, and it coincided with the Day of the African Child theme for 2018, which was Leaving No Child Behind Us. And we had a session, and like I said, it was limited to the capital. And I think in future planning would be better so that we could extend it to other areas where children shared their views on issues that are of concern to them that needs to be included, that we needed to include in our report. When you look at, I think it skipped. These are some of the pictures from the report writing sessions. After breaking groups into thematic areas, we encouraged them to validate their information. We were logged on to confirm statistics as we got them. Some were on the phone with journalists who had written some articles about issues that were of interest to us. And it was a learning process as well for civil society organizations. I think we had a representation of about 54 civil society organizations, all that work with children's issues. Yes, sir?
1 minute, please. We need to wrap up.
Okay. And then regarding the African Charter and the Rights and Welfare of the Child, it's no secret. Botswana's reporting record leaves a lot to be desired, but we are not sitting on it, really. It's an embarrassing thing for us as civil society organizations. And we continue to lobby and engage government to look into it and ensure that they're reporting we engaged them to lift the reservation that they had made on Article 2 of the Charter, because in the past, Botswana defined a child as someone below the age of 18. But we have seen impact there. There was conversation around the amendments of the Penal Code where the age of majority for children was raised to 18, but the reservation is still there, and it just requires a letter to be sent. But in engaging government and civil society organizations in partnership with CRINSA, we were told that the report to the committee is ready. It's just with the accounting officers to make sure that they finalize it and send it out. The reasons were that there's been a lot of leadership change in their offices, and the new ones would come, would go, and they needed to familiarize themselves with the report. I think, like I've spoken, the lessons is we really need to expand into other districts, into tapping on other demographic groups of children. And I will stop there. As you had shared that we only had a minute left. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Chirwa. I think from your report, there are two issues that come out, which I think we are going to be dealing with in a very short while. First of all is the issue that most of our governments have no problem reporting to the CRC. They put in a lot of time, they put in a lot of resources, but then we keep talking about African solutions to African problems, and we have a mechanism that is African, and we are not reporting to it. So I think that is one of the key issues that is coming up. I think it's going to be dealt with again in a short while. Also, the other aspect is the issue of child participation, of course, comes in. It's quite something. And also, I hope we are learning from the other networks, from the other participants on how to effectively engage with government. A question had already been sent on one of our YouTube, on our YouTube platform, urging CSOs to be more proactive and push governments harder, because we hear this issue of the report is ready but has not been submitted for quite some time in many countries, in Zimbabwe, in Uganda. The report is ready. If it has not been submitted, then for all intents and purposes, it's not ready. If we hear that the report is ready for 4 years, then there's something wrong, because somebody is not doing their work somewhere. So the example that I always use in that regard is, even when we are going through political change in government, you will see the policemen on the road, they will be working. You will see teachers in school, they will be teaching. You will have broadcasters in the broadcasting house, they'll be broadcasting. But the only thing affected by the various changes within government and processes is one report that is due to the African Committee. Yes, so we need to look at that and put our leaders to task. If the report is ready, identify the challenge and let's have it submitted. So thank you very much for sharing. In some instances, we have organizations, civil society organizations, they are very much willing to do the report. They've organized, but we have some kind of antagonism, either antagonism with the governments don't want to support the CSOs in the process. And we want to hear from Gabon on their experience in developing the reports, what kind of challenges they faced, and what kind of recommendations they have, and the key asks they have from us. Hortense from REDEAC, 7 minutes kindly. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Ok, merci Cléo.
Thank you, Cleophas. I would like first to thank the organizers of this experience sharing forum. They offered an opportunity to know the child rights situation in Africa and the challenges that human rights defenders and advocates face on a daily basis. I was asked to present the challenges that Gabon civil society encounters in developing alternative reports.
Excusez-moi.
Excuse me, give me a minute.
Désolé, j'ai un petit souci technique.
I have a small technical challenge, but it's solved. As the vice chair of REDEAC, the Gabon Rights Network, I would like to say that the challenges identified for the Gabon civil society are the same for all our neighboring countries in Central Africa who were unable to speak today. and I want to just underline that. On matters Gabon, first, we thank the state party, our country, for imposing the Decree 001 on the promulgation of the institutional law on the Child Rights Code in the Republic of Gabon. We had waited for this institutional law for about 5 years, and this institutional law was finally promulgated. So, the National Network for Promotion of Child Rights had a huge contribution in the preparation of this law and working with the ministry in charge of child protection. So this law intends to protect and to promote child rights and freedoms. As several countries have done, Gabon is a signatory of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The Gabonese government presented its last report in 2016, and the civil society also presented its alternative report. Despite these efforts that have been made by the country, we have observed helplessly the flagrant violation of child rights in all sectors of our country. And these violations are characterized by child kidnappings, ritual crimes, sexual violence, and most of the perpetrators are heads of households, and for fear of reprisals, these children are intimidated, and there is a lot of corruption, and most of the victims usually withdraw their complaints. In matters health, we have seen the absence of management of cases that require health care, and the National Health Insurance Fund and the National Social Security Fund do not have any guarantees to help people in economically vulnerable situations. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic has only worsened the vulnerability of street children. In the education sector, since 2009, our children have not had even the right to have 6 continuous months of education. The year is usually marked by intermittent teacher strikes and sometimes children who go on strike and who demand of their rights. And most times, these children usually are attacked from our defense and security forces. Concerning the preparation of alternative reports, civil society organizations have met several challenges, such as difficulty in access to information from the national government. And when we receive this information, most of the time, this information is not reliable. We have also seen the unavailability of crucial information that is detained by government, the lack of sensitization on recommendations from the African Committee, and the government who considers the civil society as a threat and not an implementing partner of its policies. There is also a lack of statistical data that is clearly defined and verified. The competency of members on the understanding of the procedures in drafting and publishing of reports, and we also have insufficiency and inability to draft detailed and comprehensive report. We also have a challenge in terms of funding. We have this problem, and you'll agree with me that you cannot accomplish anything without funding. Finally, we also lack monitoring mechanisms for the recommendations given by the committee of experts. To conclude, civil society stakeholders while they carry out their duties on the ground, are often either arrested and imprisoned for having made certain demands in the public eye. And so we are asking the committee first to look into the violations of child rights that are increasing and are on the rise in Gabon and in the Central African region, and to ensure that states ease access of information that is crucial for civil society organizations to develop alternative reports, and that the committee sends its recommendations in duplicate. That is to say, when the committee sends its recommendations to the state party, the civil society should also receive these recommendations, because oftentimes these recommendations do not reach us because they don't want to give them to us. And we prepare alternative reports without the recommendations of the committee. I think I would stop there, and if there are any questions and others that may arise, I am ready to answer them when they arise. I thank you.
Thank you so much for Tense. I think you've saved us a minute or two, and your presentation has been straight to the point. And we are going to, I've taken note of that. We will address these issues in the Q&A, specifically on the issue of access to information. It also ties up with what Ayalu was trying to suggest earlier, that at some point we may need to relook at the entire reporting procedure and make some of this information much more available, be it in terms of state party reporting, alternative reporting. I think it's very important. And also the issue of civil society space. I mean, the committee has to weigh in at some point, because CSOs are partners with the committee. And if there is an issue of civil society space, they should be able to help us to advocate with governments, especially in terms of civil society space. We are going to move on to our next and last presentation. And unfortunately, I have not been able to see whether the Mali representative is online. So we are going to have our last presentation unless the Mali representative is online under different email or name, and I'm not able to see. We are going to have the presentation from Gambia. Gambia has reported to the CRC, but not to the African Committee. And we wanted to get some insights, of course, very briefly about the process of reporting to the CRC, but also to weigh in with the Gambia representative about how come we are doing CRC and not doing African Charter. What are the experiences? What are the challenges? Is it because Gambia is very close to Europe? I hope that is not the case. But what are the challenges? How can we make sure that we have reporting that either addresses both or prioritizes the African Charter? So, Monsieur Lamine Saidi from the Gambia Child Protection Alliance, you have 7 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much to colleagues. It's indeed a pleasure to be invited to this this important forum. It's important to note that the Gambia adopted, really ratified the UNCRC in 1990, and also, ratified the African Charter in 2000. So since then, the UNCRC, the Gambia has reported on its initial, first, second, and third periodic report. On the African Charter, since after the ratification in 2000, the Gambia has never, submitted its report. Few reasons I will suggest down the line. So I need not to go through the reporting cycle, which has already been discussed, but it's important. I'm sure all of us know that the complementary report encompasses a factual objective, second representation of actual situation of children on the ground. So, and that does the name complementary report. Now, the Gambia's experience on the UNCRC. First, when we heard that the state submitted its report, we immediately contacted Save the Children Dakar office, who are the main funders of Child Protection Alliance in the Gambia. on how to prepare a report. So we requested that from them because they have the technical capacity. So the lesson in this is that we can rely on each other in terms of capacity. So to that effect, a 5-day workshop was held at a local hotel. The content of this discussion was centered on CRC, report writing based on, clusters. Based on these clusters were identified, about 5 main members of the Voice of the Young. Voice of the Young is important to know that it's a child-led organization under the Child Protection Alliance. It's a structure under the Child Protection Alliance, and it mainly looks at, comprises children. But we also have representation from other child-led organizations in the Gambia, including persons with disability. So to this effect, a committee was set up from amongst CPA member organizations. By CPA member organizations, we mean Child Protection Alliance member organizations. Child Protection Alliance is a member organization of about 35 organizations working with and for children in the Gambia. So subgroups were formed. Each committee, was assigned with a cluster. Just the previous presentations highlighted that the reporting format suggested by the African Committee of Experts, really put the reporting system into clusters. So we form groups based on clusters. Now, as a member organization, our members have expertise in different areas. So we look at clusters and also members are assigned to these clusters based on their expertise in the various areas. For example, matters of education, we have what we call Education for All campaign, child fund, and so forth, were assigned with those clusters to look at them. And of course, a repertoire was identified for each of these groups. So immediately after these teams doing their group works, a 3-day retreat was organized in a local hotel, for the compilation and finalization of the report. Each subcommittee presented its draft on the clusters assigned. This was criticized, it was critiqued, data gaps were identified, and the draft thoroughly reviewed. A repertoire was identified at the end of the retreat to include all the comments in the draft final report. A subcommittee, were given a week to include all the data gaps and missing informations. The final validation workshop was done and the report was adopted. Now, on child participation, I've had some people talk about child participation. The Gambia also has a model in terms of child participation, and this is a structure called Voice of the Young that is found within communities and schools. The Voice of the Young members and children from other child-led organizations were included in all the subcommittees and participated in the retreat. Special workshop was organized for the children to have their inputs in the report, The Gambia They Want. The title of that meeting was called The Gambia We Want. So children visualized the Gambia in the context of the various clusters. It was named The Gambia We Want. Their views and opinions were incorporated in the report. A short questionnaire was also developed, administered amongst children in the rural Gambia, mainly schools with our structures called Voice of the Young. A special workshop was also held with children to validate their inputs in the report. A CPS staff member, a board member, and a child participant participated in the CRC pre-session. I'm sure some of our members, some of the participants in this session, in this meeting are already familiar with the pre-session. It is important to note that some of the setbacks we have on this, or the drawbacks, is that children out of school and children with disabilities weren't actively involved, and we have noted this. Of course, an organization that represents persons with disability in the Gambia was represented, called, the Gambia Federation of the Disabled. They were represented. Due to inadequate capacity, children couldn't be supported to do their own report, which could have been, a preferable means. Now, why are we not reporting to the CRC? These are 2 points that I think, in our views, that we thought the state is not giving much attention to the African Charter because there is no international organization in the country to push the Charter. UNICEF champions the CRC and supports the state in the popularization and submission of reports to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. It also provides and pays a consultant to prepare the report, on behalf of the state. So this was done by UNICEF. A consultant was paid by UNICEF, and the state was also encouraged to popularize. A UN special rapporteur have visited the country, that the Gambia. The last of this visit was the special rapporteur on the sale of children, and this rapporteur, in his visit, emphasized the importance of the CRC to the state. No member of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of Children has ever visited the Gambia up to date. So probably at the level of, political level, maybe this may be some of the issues. But the good news is that the Child Protection Alliance, with support from Save the Children, has engaged the government of the Gambia through its various structures like the Department of Social Welfare, the Ministry for Children and Social Welfare, the National Assembly Select Committee on Children. The National Assembly refers to the Parliament. Its Committee on Children was engaged on the importance of reporting. And Save the Children 2 years ago committed some resources through CPA to submit to support the state to prepare its its report. But we later understood that we were later notified by the Ministry for Justice responsible for submission of reports that funding has already been secured to prepare a report. So we continued our advocacy. We established what we call an advocacy task force. And now this advocacy task force was going at the highest level. It was engaging authorities at the highest level, including ministers and permanent secretaries and directors, to influence policies and, of course, also, advocate for reporting. Now, we also engaged the National Assembly Select Committee on Children. The good news, like I said, is I'm sorry for the interruption. The state, with the intervention of civil society organizations like the Child Protection Alliance, has engaged the government. And now, as we speak, last year, the state has prepared its initial first, second, third, fourth, and fifth periodic report. And this report was validated and ready for submission. So we're now doing an advocacy. We're lobbying with government to ensure that the state report is submitted to that effect. So this is how far we've gone at the level of the CRC, and on the African Charter. These are the efforts that we've put in place, and like I said, the state has already prepared its report and is ready for submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lamin. At least we have some good news that the number of countries that have not reported to the Charter is going to decrease by 1 if we keep up the pressure and make sure that Gambia submits the report. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. I know we are running a little bit behind time, but we've had various experiences from different countries on what they've gone through. Some of it has been similar, some of it has been different. The challenges are both the same and different. And I think what I've done on my end is to cluster really a lot of the comments from the presentations into various subgroups. And I'm going to request that during our Q&A session, we be very targeted so that we have a brief session at the end where we are able to come up with a couple of resolutions. But before we proceed to the Q&A, I'm going to give ADM from the committee secretariat. I will be strict, ADM, because it's starting to get late. 5 minutes to just speak about overall the assessment of the content of the alternative reports that have been presented to the committee. and then I will guide everybody through the Q&A session, and then we will be able to finish. So 5 minutes, over to you, Eddie.
Thank you very much, Cleopas. I'll try to be as brief as possible. With regards to I'll just make a few comments on the quality of the reports that we wish to receive when we're getting complementary reports. And in that regard, I mean, the importance of complementary reports cannot be overemphasized. And it's very essential for the committee to receive. It's very important that we get complementary reports so that the committee's concluding observations and recommendations are informed, are concrete, and can be actually something that can be implemented on the grassroots, at the grassroots level. So I'll just highlight a few points that might be included in a complementary report so that it actually informs the committee well on its recommendations. So the first point is that complementary reports should actually highlight information in relation to gaps that are existing as opposed to the state party report. So sometimes we get reports that actually repeat what has been indicated in the state party report, and that does not help the committee in any way in coming up or in formulating its recommendations. Rather, sorry. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Ediam. Please continue.
Okay, sorry.
I'm not taking the same direction with you.
And it will also be good if the information that's provided in the complementary report can actually be backed with data. So sometimes the committee might actually receive opinions in its in complementary reports, but that does not actually it cannot be used in formulating recommendations because it's not backed with data or an objective information which the committee actually can use in formulating its recommendations, because the committee needs to come up with recommendations from an objective perspective, and it also should be seen as an impartial organ, as it is as an impartial organ. And its complementary reports should also highlight issues which which CSOs actually want the committee to raise with states. So sometimes the report actually lists so many informations and it's not clear what CSOs are actually demanding or asking the committee to make recommendations on. So it's important if complementary reports actually highlight gaps, and they support the gaps with data, and actually put it in a very clear and concise way so that the committee actually can pick it up and put it or actually change it into a recommendation form. So it's easier when a complementary report would actually indicate, now we would request the committee to make recommendations with regards to this and that, as opposed to just only providing information. And it's also important that complementary reports actually highlight issues that the state party might have raised, but might have like some issues can be true, like state parties actually highlight their successes, but there is also another angle into looking at the success. For instance, there was an instance where a state party actually reported that the number of girls that are going to school actually increased, but the number of girls or the gender disparity was low because boys were not going to school as much as they were supposed to go. So, for instance, if the government says the number of girls that are going to, or the gender disparity has decreased, but there is another side of that information which is missing from the state party report. That's the kind of information complementary reports actually should bring up to the committees inside, because the committee did not have a grassroots level presence, and it heavily relies on information it gets from CSOs, coalitions, and other briefings that it receives from CSOs that have observer status with it. While this is what I want to raise with regards to the content of the complementary report, I'd strongly recommend that CSOs actually take part in the process of the preparation of the state party report whenever it's possible. Of course, that space is very limited in some countries, but whenever that's possible, CSOs should actually take part in when governments are preparing their reports, so that now it's easier for also CSOs to come up with a complementary report. Thank you, Cleophas, and I'm done.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ediam, for that insight. I think we now understand, when we submit the reports, we don't know the person receiving them, what their view is. And we are happy that at least you've been able to give us some insights about what we should consider. So at this juncture, I would like to thank everybody. Thank you for those of you who are still with us. We are getting into the most exciting juncture of our webinar today, where we get to respond to everything and anything that has been raised as far as we have time. So there are a couple of issues that have come up, and I would like to be very deliberate in terms of directing and the consolidated questions from my end. And if we feel that there's something that has been missed, then we can always have a bilateral, either on email or through our day-to-day interactions where this will be answered. Overall, there have been issues raised about child participation with special concern for how do we include most vulnerable categories of children. There are children that are in juvenile institutions, children in situations of armed conflict, children on the move. So how do we make sure, first of all, that we have the participation of children, but then it's meaningful and it incorporates all children? There has been a very key concern about the involvement and visibility of grassroots organizations. They have said very clearly that they are only able to attend this session because we are doing this virtually. But in terms of physical meetings and engagements at country level, they are nowhere in the picture. So we want at least some CSO representatives to give us ways forward in terms of, we don't want reports to be compiled by organizations that are in the capital only. What are our measures to make sure that there is inclusion? What do we do with countries that have not yet ratified the Charter? What do we do? Are we in a position to do anything? So that is something that I also will be raising with the panelists. And then there is the coordination of reporting. Is it just the committee following up with countries? Can this be part of the larger African peer review mechanism? Can we ensure that there's a coordination so that when a country is long overdue for reporting, for example, some things are tripped and some things happen and they are all aware and they don't just keep on postponing? I mean, what action can we take beyond just telling countries you've not reported? Then there is a challenge to us CSOs. We are submitting 2 reports from the same country. What reflection is that on CSO coordination in our own countries? So we are definitely going to want some representatives who've been working in the sector for quite some time. How do we promote coordination among CSOs at country level? And then we are looking at access to information from national governments as well as the CSO space. What role can the committee play in promoting CSO space at national level so that organizations are able to report and they don't face any unnecessary roadblocks along the way? And then any other issue that we will not have resolved, then we can still look through in the chat box and we can talk about it as far as we have time. So I'm straight away starting with the issue of child participation and ensuring that all categories of children are reached. Margaret, you gave us very good insights about child participation. Are you able to respond to this? How do we make sure children with disabilities, children in juvenile institutions are part of this process? So 1.5 minutes, Margaret, if you're still online.
Yeah, thanks, Cleophas. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, what I would have to say is, like in our process, we had an organization called Clean Start that works with children in juvenile justice system. And so they were able to bring children from those, from the institutions to take part in the process. So my proposal would be just working with the structures that already exist, finding out which organizations are already working with children with disabilities, street children, working with children in juvenile justice institutions, because that's a structure that already exists and you can take advantage of that to be able to incorporate children within the reporting. The other thing that I would really like to point out is starting from zero. So some of the organizations already work with children and have already trained them on what children's rights are. And some of the children, particularly like the ones in juvenile justice systems, do not have an understanding of what child rights are. So starting from zero, train them on what child rights are, train them on the charter, train them on why they need to have their voice heard in terms of their experiences, so that even as they are presenting what they would like to communicate to the committee, then they are starting from a point where now they know what they need to communicate, basically. Over to you, Cleophas. That's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret. I'm sure we can all share and learn. There are quite a number of people on this call even who've done extensively the issue of child participation. I know Save the Children has done, I know all our organizations have an element of child participation. We need to make sure that in our subsequent reporting, we don't just reach the children where it's convenient for us to reach, because I think it leaves out the children that most need our intervention. So I think that is clear. So the next set of questions, unfortunately, Ayalu from the committee, there's a lot of things here that you need to respond to. So I need to first of all confirm if you're still online, Ayalu.
Yes, I'm online.
Absolutely, good. So I'm going to throw about 3 questions in your direction, and I would ask if maybe you take a minute per question. The first one would be maybe explaining to us what kind of coordination mechanism there is in terms of following up on state party reporting. Do we just wait for the calendars to elapse? Is it part of a bigger mechanism? So that is number 1. Number 2, what is it that we can do when child rights violations are occurring in countries that have not signed or ratified the charter? What is open that we can do? How can the committee assist us there? And then, of course, number 3 is the issue that has come up from time to time in terms of reporting or some of the communication with state parties a bit more transparent, so that governments don't lock in information and make it difficult for organizations to develop alternative reports, or maybe how the committee can help enhance the civil society space in various countries. So if you would pleasure us with the response with the 3 of those, and then, yes, we'll be off your case for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Cleophas. I'm not sure if I get the third question right, but anyway, I'm sure my colleagues can also come in. Let me start from the second one. What do we do when countries which have not ratified the charter? I think that's a question, but keeps violating children's rights. As a committee, we can take a very practical case, Somalia, for instance. Somalia is one of the countries which has not yet ratified the African Children's Charter, but as you all probably know, there is a kind of a regressive measure that they are trying to take by tabling a bill which could somehow allow child marriage. This was done quite recently. Somalia, though, has not ratified the African Children's Charter. It has signed the African Children's Charter way before. So according to international law, countries which are ratified a particular treaty, though they have not ratified those treaties at the international level, which also includes the African Children's Charter, they should not act contrary to the very purpose and object of that particular treaty or an instrument. So they should not take any measure, they should not take any action which could contradict the very purpose and nature of that treaty. So quite recently, actually the day before yesterday, the African Committee of Experts has written a letter of urgent appeal to the government of Somalia to actually reconsider this bill and to withdraw this bill so that they don't actually allow child marriage by passing this bill. So this also contradicts not only the African Children's Charter, but also it contradicts many other international human rights instruments that Somalia has ratified. So in a situation where the countries do not ratify, the African Committee of Experts always makes reference to other treaties, the practice within the African Union, the policy towards human rights, good governance, rule of law that the African Union is trying to build within the continent, including through the Agenda 2060 and everything. So we always make reference to different instruments and the provisions so that the countries can actually comply with those requirements. So in addition to the signatory requirements, in case that particular country do not sign the instrument. In terms of follow-up on reporting, in cases where countries are late in reporting to the African Committee of Experts, we always engage at the African Committee of Experts level. Like, for instance, our colleague from the Gambia, he mentioned that the committee never had never visited the Gambia to push for submission of the report. I mean, I understand why he said that, because our visit was also not that visible. So it's our fault, basically. We take the blame. But we have engaged the government of the Gambia on the ground, if I'm not wrong, in 2016. In 2017 and in 2018, we have also engaged the government of the Gambia and other countries which have never submitted any report to the African Committee of Experts in different forums. Representatives from the Ministry of Justice, particularly from Gambia, and other countries were present, basically, in these forums where we have engaged. And they have even promised to submit the report in 1 year's time. So there are a number of avenues, including sending notables regularly, reminding them. And sometimes we also send sometimes copies of those notables to our strategic partners so that they can actually go and follow up and lobby the governments to report. So at the end of the day, what we do is, when governments are failing to comply with their obligations under the Charter to report on the implementation of the African Children's Charter, we submit a report as part of our annual activities that we submit to the Executive Council, which is one of the policy organs of the Union, which is actually the congregation of the leaders of the African Union during the Union Summit. That's where we submit our reports. We inform the heads of states and governments through the ministers of foreign affairs of the members of the African Union, for them to make decisions on this non-compliance of member states. So that's why we find these regional mechanisms very important, because at the end of the day, that's where we end up. We report non-compliance to the heads of states and governments for political pressure, for political intervention and everything. So of course, the sanction region for non-compliance on issues related to human rights violation is very weak within the African Union, as we all know. But the procedure is there. At least the opportunity is there, and we're trying to push governments to actually make a pressure on these governments who are not complying with their reporting obligations. So together with civil society organizations and of course our partner organizations, and through our procedures and mechanisms within the African Union, we are actually putting a lot of pressures. And when that pressure is complemented by civil society organizations' regular follow-up, it can hit the target. The third one, really, Cleo, I'm not sure, maybe my colleagues, when they come in to reflect on the other questions, they can reflect, but I'm sure you'll also give us maybe the opportunity to reflect on some of the very important questions specifically directed to us. Like, for instance, whether civil society organizations can submit reports without any state party reports and everything. Maybe I'm not sure if there is any time for us to reflect on that as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ayadu. I think then what we are going to do, because the question was largely about, we know there are countries where civil society space is shrinking, and this is affecting the ability of organizations to develop alternative reports to hold governments to account. And we wanted maybe if you could weigh in. But I think I'm going to do one last question and then one last comment, and then I will give representatives from the committee as well as from Save the Children time to wrap up and say something. So I hope, Doris, you're still online. Doris, please confirm if you're still online.
Yes, I'm still online. Yeah.
Okay, yes. So there has been a lot of interest from our end. I mean, looking through the questions and looking through the presentations, that there is more reporting being done to the CRC than there is being done to the African Charter. Maybe if you could weigh in as one of the partners that supports organizations to report to the African Charter, what do you feel we should do to ensure that we balance the reporting between the two? Because clearly we have a challenge in terms of the reporting to the African Charter. What are some of your ideas that you can give us so that, because today we have the community here, we have CSOs, we have other partner organizations. I know Plan International is in the meeting. So what are some of the ideas that we can carry out to make sure that we have more reporting as opposed to just having governments focusing on the CRC?
Thank you, Cleo. And this is really a great question. I may propose just perhaps two strategies that we could explore. The first strategy is actually in relation to some of the challenges that have been raised, including by the Gambia. The fact that we don't have a champion, an NGO or an organization that can finance, or resource the development of this report to the committee, to the African Committee, is one of the key challenges. We don't have a UN agency, and I don't think maybe we should have a new UN agency promoting this. But in any way, what is needed is an entity that can really sponsor and resource the development of the alternative or complementary report. So that's one. And I think we can really pool our resources, and that no plan is doing it, Save the Children is doing it at the country level. But what is needed is a Pan-African mechanism that could actually come in a systematic way to resource the development of the complementary report. But we also know that the reporting to the CRC is happening systematically. So is it possible to, one, ask the committee to work with the CRC to streamline the reporting, so that when you report to one entity, you are systematically reporting with some tweaking to the other entity. So if member state or civil society organization are reporting to the CRC, can they concurrently develop their report, be it the state report, the state party report, or the complementary report to the African Committee? So, and also maybe as a way of also accelerating the reporting, having a calendar of countries that have to report in the next session or the following 2 or 3 sessions could also perhaps help civil society organization in programming or in planning the reporting. But I think for me, the big takeaway is that the fact that we already have resources for the CRC, we should try to make sure that we are reporting concurrently on the charter. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Doris. I think that is a challenge to all of us, especially the partners in the room. We need a champion for the African Charter. We need to move away from fragmented action because once we do this together, then it will definitely result into a much wider and a much more increased rate of reporting, as well as the quality of the reports as illustrated earlier. So I think that's a very good point. We need to put that in. So how we are going to do this is we have one more question, and this is largely around the issue of coordination amongst ourselves as CSOs. So first of all, there was an issue that was raised that sometimes countries submit 2 reports. you're talking about essentially the same children. They don't have different problems, but you're submitting two reports, which reflects a bit an issue of coordination at national level. And also grassroots organizations are not feeling like they are part of this. And I think maybe I will still throw this challenge to both the committee and ourselves in terms of ensuring the visibility of the committee all the way to the grassroots level. We need to look through how this can be done. As Ayalo has already pointed out, they did the visits to the Gambia, but you see the Gambia coalitions, you get my argument. So maybe in terms of visibility, but also building coalitions at national level that actually involve the grassroots constituents, so that we don't have coalitions of CSOs and they only incorporate organizations that are working in the big cities, in the big towns. And when we have an opportunity, the rights of the children we are trying to address go all the way to the. So maybe again, I would urge our national coalitions to look at the criteria, the requirements for members to have observer status with the committee, for example, to encourage their members to go through this. If there is a challenge that has been identified, we can all deal with it so that we have more organizations that are engaging with this and have ability to escalate these issues. So we can welcome comments on that in the chat box about how we can coordinate better. But before we go to the very last session where we are just going to have a very brief way forward, I would like to give the African Committee of Experts Secretariat 5 minutes perhaps to respond to the very specific questions that Ayalu has said were there. As most of them are straightforward, so I'm hoping we will not take more than 5 minutes so that we can wrap this up. Thank you. Over to you, Ayalu.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cleo. I will just tackle one of the questions, and maybe Philip, Adiam, and others. I think Musa is also still online. They may reflect on some of the questions that they have also captured. Just in 1 minute, there is a question raised by two colleagues whether the committee can receive civil society organizations report or complementary report in the absence of a state party report. And this is a very interesting question, basically. And it looks like that we also have somehow a gap, not entirely, but somehow our rules and procedures and guidelines are not really crafted in a very clear manner to address these issues. According to rule number 75 of the rules of procedures of the African Committee of Experts, in case where governments fail to submit their report despite the repeated reminders that the committee has been sending to these states, the committee may consider the report, the monitoring the situation of children's rights in that particular country as it deems necessary. So it's not very clear on what should be done, but there is a very kind of enabling provision where it says that the committee can actually consider to do what it deems necessary. That means this can be interpreted to say that the committee may monitor the implementation of the African Children's Charter within a particular country, even in the absence of state party report, and report that fact to the heads of states and governments, to the assembly, basically, through the executive council. That's what the rules of procedures says. So in that process, in a situation where the committee decides to monitor the situation of children's rights without a state party in a country, the committee may also decide to receive a CSO report on the situation of children's rights in that same country. So we never had tested this before because the committee is still waiting and, of course, lobbying governments to comply with their reporting obligations and to submit their reports. So this is a procedure which have never been tested, but there is somehow an opportunity if the committee wishes to decide to go that way for CSOs also to submit their reports. Maybe before I conclude, something that you may consider when you discuss the way forward, Cleo, would be for this forum to really highlight some of the challenges that you are facing as civil society organizations, and communicate that to the African Committee of Experts. Of course, on issues which the Committee of Experts to consider revising or change and things like that. So an official communication can be sent to the African Committee of Experts to consider revising its rules of procedures. We are in the process of revising the working documents of the committee, so it would be an opportunity for the committee to reflect on so that we can enhance civil society's engagement with the African Committee of Experts on the Right and Welfare of the Child. Briefly from my side, that's what I have. But on some of the questions on combined reports and things like that, I think my colleagues may take that up. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ayalo. So colleagues from the committee, 2 minutes, Edia, Philip.
Can I come in with Cleo?
Yes, you can proceed, Edia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cleo. I just wanted to reflect on one question that was raised, whether or not the committee has an approved list of national organizations or networks that can submit complementary reports to the committee. The committee does not have a list of approved networks or organizations that can submit reports to the committee, but we receive complementary reports from national coalitions, not a single civil society organization, and we reach out to those coalitions through the regional CSO networks that are available. But I also want to use this opportunity to flag one issue, is the fact that CSOs with observers that's before the committee can actually submit in addition to complementary reports that the committee receives. So this can respond to some of the issues of receiving two reports and those issues. So instead of submitting another complementary report, whenever civil societies feel like there is an information that should be added on top of the
Edium, we're having difficulties hearing you. Edium, your connection is really bad.
We have
Edium, your connection is really bad. We can't hear you. Edium, your connection is bad. We can't hear you.
Issues that they would come to take.
Okay, we lost Edium at some point. I don't know whether she's still online, but
okay. Can you hear me now, Cleo?
Yes, your connection was really bad at some point, but if you can just hurry up a little bit so that we can wrap up, please.
I'm here if you can hear me, Cleo.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry for the interruption. I was just saying there was one question which raised the issue whether or not the committee has a list of CSOs or networks that are mandated to submit complementary reports to the committee. And the committee does not have such a list of organizations, but it receives complementary reports from national coalitions. But I wanted to raise the issue of a possibility where CSOs can actually submit briefings on top of the complementary reports. So this somehow also responds to the issue of collaboration that was flagged during the discussion. So and whenever a civil society organization that actually has an observer status before the committee feels like there's an information that's missing in the complementary report, or that the committee should actually leverage on, then that organization can actually submit a briefing on a specific issue if it has an observer status before the committee. But we don't have specifically listed CSOs that can actually submit complementary reports. We rather receive complementary reports from national coalitions, and we reach out to those national coalitions using the regional CSO networks that are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Ediam. Sorry. Thank you, Ediam, for highlighting that. Perhaps, do we have a comment from Philippe? Because I have one follow-up question that maybe I can either have Philippe or Ayalu respond to before we wrap up. There was a discussion some time back about streamlining the reporting guidelines between the CRC and the African Charter. Where are we with that? Is that something that was completed? Because we are seeing quite this coming up a lot in these discussions. Is there any support that is needed to actualize this, or is it something that has been completed? Or so what's the update on that? So either Ayalu, Philippe, you can respond to that, please.
Okay, merci beaucoup Cléopas pour cette question.
Thank you, Cleopas, for this question.
Je sais pas si, en fait, c'est une question récurrente.
It's a recurring issue in among member states and among civil society organizations. But you should know that this reporting process is something that is included in the Charter. For us, this means that there is a need for an amendment to the Charter, and that amendment process takes a long time. But we need to say that when we speak about the submission of reports by the state parties to the UN and not to the African Charter, we need to read our instruments and see that when the Geneva Committee receives the report for the CRC, we can adapt the same reports because our charter is based on the CRC, but the African Charter has its own specificities. So when the CRC is receiving its report, we can take the same report from the state party and implement the specificities of the CRC report that are in the Charter and implement them when the state party implements the CRC. And we have a working group within the committee to work with the United Nations. As you know, we also have 2 members of the African Committee of Experts who are on the UN CRC to facilitate the process. And we are counting on the support of international civil society organizations as well as national CSOs for the support that they give to state parties in drafting reports. It is good to have a large number of CSOs in order to inform state parties, because we sent this new guidelines by a verbal note to tell them that when they draft their reports, instead of taking a consultant to develop the CRC and then recruiting another consultant to write for the African Committee, the 2 reports can be written concurrently and submitted at the same time. And for the next upcoming session, we have a discussion to set up a working group at the committee level. And of course, we will have a working group on the challenges of submitting reports and even the challenges faced in matters of implementing the recommendations of the committee. And I also think that the CSOs that are here today, they only need to see how they can also obtain observer status at the African Committee. The guidelines have been have been revised, and we do not require so many documents in the 2 working languages of the committee. We have streamlined the process and reduced certain bureaucracies so that CSOs can improve their observer status. That's all I wanted to add. Over to you, Cleo.
Point, maybe just I will take 2 minutes to do a bit of an analysis, not comprehensive, I must say, but from what we've had today, which I hope has been useful for everybody as much as it has been to me, is the fact that we recognize that there is a problem with reporting to the African Charter because the recent trends that we've seen is that fewer countries are reporting, which means fewer CSOs are reporting. And that is for various reasons that have been identified. There is effort, to enhance the reporting, but we really need to highlight this fact. We need to engage more, especially with countries that are yet to submit their initial reports, which are not so many. And then countries that have fallen back on reporting, which means they are not doing their periodic reports as required. It's still clear from all our presentations that CSOs and governments need capacity building on reporting. There's this assumption that we've been there for 30 years, the Charter has been there for 30 years, everybody knows 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a whole constituency out there that is dealing with children's rights who are not aware of this. And I think for the funding partners in the room, this is a challenge directly to you. When CSOs say they need capacity building on the African Charter, let's not assume we all know because it's been around for 30 years. This is something that keeps on coming up. It's something that is required. On the issue of civil society space and coordination with government, it's critical for CSOs in this entire process to engage with governments, which is only dependent on civil society space being present in the various countries. And we are hoping at the AU level, at national level, there will be really strong messages to countries that civil society organizations are their partners. We are complementing the work that they are doing. So we need to work together on this. Child participation has come up, and this is a challenge to all of us, ensuring effective child participation, but also making sure that the categories of children that are usually left behind are part and parcel of the reporting process. So the next time the CSOs are presenting their reports, please challenge them, and challenge them again. Did you consult children? Did you consult all categories of children? What were these challenges that you faced so that we don't leave any child behind? CSOs need to coordinate more. We need to stop these incidents. As I said at the very beginning of my presentation, we are a coalition of the willing. I bring the health expertise, you bring the education expertise, somebody else brings the expertise. We are not competing, we are wholesomely trying to make life better for children. We need to coordinate more, include everybody in our reporting process so that nobody is left behind. And then lastly, from my end, we need a champion for the Charter. We have UN agencies, supporting various processes in terms of reporting to the CRC. We see funding, we see government political goodwill. We need a mechanism where we can have the same for the African Charter. My last observation would be we take the invitation from the committee quite seriously. As the CSO forum, we can sit down and look at the various challenges that have been raised by members today, that will be raised in the subsequent webinars that will be targeted. And then we can formally write to the committee highlighting what changes might be needed, what assistance might be needed from you. And I know this needs to be a very structured document. So we'll take some time with the CSO partners through the CSO forum, and you definitely can bet on it. We will write and say, these are some of the challenges that we have experienced, and these are some of the recommendations, so that if you take it up, it makes it easier for us to be able to do reporting as civil society organizations. Having said that and recognizing that we have kept you beyond the time that is required, I would like to hand over this session to Doris to briefly give us her reflections, maybe a bit of a way forward in terms of the discussions today, and to officially close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cleo, for an excellent summary of the way forward. So I will be very brief in my closing remarks. I think for me, the one point maybe that I would like to really reiterate, and which came from Philip, is the fact that we don't necessarily need to wait for the amendment of the charter to talk about use one report, the report from the CRC, and adapt it to the charter context, reporting context. So that's really very good news. It would be good to have those the guidelines so that we can share them with the CSO forum and civil society organizations that attended this session. The second point is the one that I had raised, but you some. I'm being informed that I need to put my my camera on, but it's dark, so I don't know whether it will be possible. Okay, I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So the second point that I wanted to raise is the one raised, the recommendation made by ILO in terms of really taking taking advantage of the opportunity that we have to present the challenges to the committee in terms of reporting for civil society organization and their involvement in reporting on complementary report. As I said, I'm going to be very brief, so those are my two key takeaways. I would like to thank all our speakers really for a really fantastic presentation that gives us the substance to analyze the opportunities and challenges that we all facing, especially at country level, to provide or to develop complementary reports. I also would like to thank the Vice Chair of the committee, who was not able to make it, but sent her presentation and her remarks, which were presented by Philip. So thank you very much, Vice Chair, Honorable Sidikou, for your remarks. And then also thank you really very much to the Secretariat, ILO, Philip, Adiam, for really a fantastic participation, a robust sharing of information. I'm sure the participants appreciated that. I would be remiss if I did not thank my team, Cleophas and Kalkidan, who did a fantastic job in preparing this first webinar of a series on, the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, but also, really also, Jennifer and Toto News, as well as her team, who made the platform available to us to have this webinar via Zoom. I also would like to thank members of the CSO Forum who attended this session. And as we said at the beginning of the webinar, this is one in a series of webinars to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Charter. So the next session or the next webinar will be dedicated to really the universal ratification of the Charter. So we know we have 6 countries. Of course, those six countries will be invited to share experiences, the process, where they are, and how we can support them to reach a universal ratification by the end of the year. It is important to do it, and we will need everybody, the committees, support, member states themselves involvement and support and commitment to really ratifying this important child rights instrument, the Charter, as well as youth civil society organization attending this webinar. There's nothing we can do without your support, without your push, without your commitment, without your energy. On those notes, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. And the session is closed.